nightlight from the socket by my bed and smashed to small plastic bits under his heavy boot. He would tell Mother that I must have broken it somehow. I could tell that she knew that he was lying. Her eyes looked sad all the time. She would try to help me in any way she could, always ushering me off to bed when Dad stumbled through the front door. I remember thinking that he looked so tired the way he swayed from side to side as I used to after soccer practice. I used to think the bottle in his hand was like the juice box Mother would give me when I looked exhausted. Every night it was the same. Mom would leave the door open just a crack so that the light from the hallway could slip in and vanish the dark corners. But every night my door would end up shutting, often before I was able to fall asleep. I could always tell who closed it. If the light slowly disappeared until I heard the faint click of the door lock, I knew Mother had shut it. After she closed the door, I could always hear my parents talking back and forth rapidly, unable to make out their words. They sounded like muffled dogs. Mom was just trying to help when she shut the door. What's the point of letting the light in when the dark slips through anyway? When Father closed the door, it was sudden and harsh, the door meeting the frame like a car crash. It was almost as if my father wanted to make sure that I would wake up from the sound of the door shutting, so I could wake up surrounded by the night. I was always too afraid to get up from the bed and open the door again. I could never have been that kid that got to slip through the hall to sleep with their parents. I'd only tried it once when the voices began. It was after my father slammed the door shut that I opened my eyes and laid silent on my bed, staring off into the dark. In the silence, I could hear them, small whispers filling my room like a cold breeze. Much like when my parents would argue through the walls, I could never make out what was being said, but I knew those voices were not my parents. It sounded like there were dozens of them all chatting to each other, a cacophony of secrets that plumed into my eardrums and rattled my heart. I convinced myself that facing my father was the lesser of two evils and slowly climbed out of bed. Opening my door, I walked timidly down the hall. It felt like that hall leading towards my parents' room stretched on forever when I was a kid, the architecture of the house giving me every chance I could to turn back. My small hands pressed open my parents' door, but they weren't sleeping. Dad was sitting on the edge of the bed, while Mom was curled up in bed. There wasn't much time to turn around, my dad's attention snapping to me faster than I could think. I had enough time to see a collection of juice boxes by my father's feet before he stood from the bed. I heard my mother offer a plea before the heavy footsteps approached me. His large open palm rested on my shoulder, and for a moment I thought that I was going to receive some comfort. Instead, I felt my father's immense strength pushing me backward and lifting my feet off the ground. My back smacked against the hall's hardwood floor, and before my approaching mother could cross the door frame, I saw my dad swing it shut with a force I felt wind press against my wet cheeks. I would have been able to sleep with the door open that night, but I ended up closing it again when I heard my parents barking again. I was so scared to sleep the next night, so afraid of the voices and my father. But when I laid down in my bed and my dad slammed the door shut, I opened my eyes to find the room wasn't so dark. Turning my head against the pillow, I turned my attention to the ceiling. I thought that she must have done it while I was at school. Above my head was my very own night sky, a collection of shining white dots that littered the ceiling, making it look like my room stretched into infinity. The lights were just bright enough to put my mind at ease. Instead of nervously observing every bleak nook and cranny of my room, from that night on I could stare up at the stars. I would look at them until my vision got hazy and I needed to remember about blinking, or until I would just pass out. When I looked at them long enough, it felt like I was watching them move, like the stars were rotating around the room. Sometimes my vision would get so bad that it looked like lights were flickering. I was so thankful for those lights. I wanted to thank my mom, but I figured that she wouldn't want me to bring it up. It was enough for her to see me getting better sleep, and she would occasionally tell me how proud she was that I got over my fear of the darkness. Even though I hadn't really, if it wasn't for the stars, I would still be afraid, but she looked so happy, so I never told her. Seeing my mom happy wasn't something I got to often, so I cherished that too. Night after night, those stars kept me company, and some part of me started to feel braver and braver. Even when I started hearing the whispers again, it just became another part of the night, another thing to keep me company. I even started closing my door so that my father didn't get the chance to slam it shut. And then, the stars went away. I could never forget that night. As I laid in bed staring up at the tiny freckles of white dotted around my ceiling, I heard a door slam. Not mine, but the front door. There were no whispers that night, so I could hear every heavy footstep. My parents started to bark, but the bass of my dad's words was higher than I was used to. It felt like his words were shaking my bed frame. On my back, I focused on the stars seemingly swaying above me as my mom's smaller footsteps raced up the stairs and my father's followed shortly after. I heard my mom gasp before there was a large thud in the living room. It sounded like when my father had pushed me down, but it was louder and definitely shook my bed. Even through the door, I could hear the soft sobs of my mother as she struggled to catch her breath. Sitting up, struggling to catch my breath as well, I could see the shadows shifting and obstructing the light from the hallways from the bottom of my closed door. My dad uttered harsh demands to my mother. She pleaded with him, still begging. I could feel the corners of my mouth lowering and my face becoming hot. I desperately wanted to do something. I felt it welling up in me and soaking my heart until it formed a lump in my throat. I looked up at the stars again, my vision obstructed by a thin film of tears gathering. The lights looked warped under the filter of liquid that pooled until it streaked down my cheeks. The darkness around those stars swirled too until it looked like it was reaching out for me. All these shapes returned to normal when I wiped my eyes clean. Then I heard one more thud. This time it was soft and muted. I was reminded of what it sounded like when my foot would hit the soccer ball, and then I heard my mother's air escaping her lungs. Before I knew it, I could feel the cool, hardwood floor in my room pulling heat from the bottom of my feet. Quickly, I had made my way to the door and pulled it open, letting the room flood with the hallway's light. I don't know what was going through my mind, probably nothing, but I approached the man who had my mother's hair clumped up in his fists. With all the strength my child's body could muster, I swung and my small, crumpled up fist landed on his left cheek. I put everything I could into it and he didn't move an inch. It was like he was made of stone or something. He turned to me. He was struggling to keep both eyes open and his breath smelled like battery acid, but again, he was faster than I could think. His massive hands wrapped around my arms and he picked me up off the ground with such little effort I felt like I didn't even exist. He smiled at me, an ugly and unkind smile, and through the slurred speech he mockingly called me a big brave man before once again shoving me backward. This time, with both his hands in the height that he had brought me to, my body soared through the door frame and back into my room. I landed much harder, and my thin frame bounced off the ground before resting. My breath had been taken out of me completely, but still, my father stepped forward, presenting his massive frame to tower over my crumpled body. Leaning over, he brought his face to mine. I could smell the intense waft of alcohol on his breath with each word he spoke. A sentence spoken through such broken speech it was a wonder that I recognized it at all. He told me if I ever touched him again, he would kill me. Lifting my head off the ground, he quickly pushed it back down, making it smash the ground. My vision jarred for a moment as he left the room, slamming the door behind him. All night I laid on the floor, motionless and hardly able to breathe. I felt so powerless and just prayed that my mom was okay. The entire time I watched the stars above me and listened to the choir of whispers until I fell asleep. Waking up, as sore as ever in my mom's arms, I felt confused. The cool air was pressing against my face as my mother cradled me to the curb outside of our home. I started to cry and look around when I noticed the red and blue lights alternating around us. She rested her hand on my head and told me to keep my eyes on hers. I did, mostly, but it was what was behind my mother that I focused on. Real stars were hanging in the night sky above us. There were more whispers around me, but they sounded different. I could hear footsteps all around us and the sound of running vehicles. I was curious, but I was so tired, and watching the actual stars miles and miles above me, I fell asleep embraced in my mother's arms. The next day, my mother explained that my father had been taken away by the police and she didn't think that he'd be coming back. I didn't know how to feel, but I knew that there was a pang of relief in me, something to distract me from the pain in my body. My mom was absent a lot after that, always leaving the house. I thought that maybe she had gotten another job since Dad was gone. She started looking happier as the days went on, and in turn, I started to feel happy too as my body healed. I was allowed to keep the door open at night so the hallway light could creep in, and so that I could make sure my mom's steps were the only ones walking up the stairs. Since I was allowed to keep the door open, I thought at the time that it made sense for my mom to take the stars down off the ceiling, even though I liked them. I didn't bring it up much because things were getting better. Not until recently anyways, when I learned what happened to my father that night. Years had passed and my mother lived in that house for all of them. She started to age and I went off to college. I recently returned to help her move her things, and she was finally leaving the house behind. I always asked her to move over and get away from the horrible memories, but she said that she couldn't leave. She said that she had memories of us in there too, and that the house had a way of looking out for her. I would laugh it off, but I was glad that she finally decided to make the move. I guess she just didn't need the house that big all to herself anymore. So we went around the house boxing all of her things up. I went into the attic and found boxes of my old childhood toys. I sorted through the boxes, remembering the few chances I had to have fun in that house. I started to feel nostalgic for the stars that used to keep me company. I thought about how they helped me cope with the darkness and how comfortable they made me feel. Then that maybe one day they would help my kid through the night, should I ever decide to have one, that is. The stars were nowhere to be found though. I sorted through all the boxes and couldn't find a single one. Figuring that she just threw them away, I climbed down from the attic and asked her where she found the stars. She looked puzzled, which wasn't that surprising. She was getting on in her years, and perhaps I needed to be more specific. I tried to remind her of the white dots that looked like stars that she put all over my ceiling to help me with the darkness. That the stars even made me feel better about the voices that I was hearing, the same stars that she took down after Dad was arrested. Her eyes fluttered for a moment before she sat down in the bed and instructed me to do the same. She began by telling me that my father was never arrested. That night after he did what he did, he went downstairs and my mother ran in to grab me. She scooped me up and pulled me into her room where she barricaded the door. She listened as my father ran around the house after noticing we weren't around anymore. He was far too drunk to even think that we were in the same room that he slept in. She listened as he came up the stairs, the steps nearly cracking under his frantic footsteps. My mother peeked through the door and watched as he walked in my room. He looked around yelling my name, saying that if I didn't come out of hiding that I was going to be in big trouble. Then he stopped and looked around the room, but with more curiosity than the anger he had before. Mom watched him slowly look up at the ceiling as if someone was calling for him. My dad stood there, framed by the door as he stood and stared at the stars on my ceiling. And then, my mother said, he started to lift off the ground. It was so dark in the room that it was like the darkness itself was pulling him up, and before she knew what to think, he was gone. She waited a moment before cautiously opening the bedroom door and stepping into the hall. Each step took minutes to get through, she said as she made her way to my room. It sounded like it was far away, my father screaming, but she said it got louder and louder until it crescendoed when my father's body dropped from the ceiling and smacked against the floor. In complete shock, my mother managed to dial the police, who also brought an ambulance with them, but she said Dad was far beyond saving. She said that with a relief in her voice. She continued to explain that she had met with the police for a long time after that night, which is why she was absent so often. The police couldn't explain what happened, but ended up ruling out my mother as a suspect in my father's death. Because the police had no idea what his cause of death was. They said it would have been physically impossible for a full-grown bear to do damage like that to a body, never mind thinking my dainty mother could do it. She said the closest thing the coroner could liken the damage to was someone falling from a plane a mile up and smacking against the pavement. She'd never get the shape of him out of her mind, the way his body had folded and pressed into herself, the way bones poked through the skin and how his eyes had rolled back. Even when looking at the complete decay of life that was my father, she felt warm that night. She never questioned it. She had been dealing with the monster that was my father since before I was born, and whatever monster it was that took him out of our life, she was thankful. That's when she said something that made my heart sink but also filled me with a sense of familiarity at the same time. She said to me that something must have been looking out for you. And I couldn't help but picture them, all the beady white orbs that hung above my head every night I closed my eyes, the white shining dots and the endless darkness around them. I found myself strangely thankful for them. What I now know were never stars. They were there ever since I could remember. As a child, I would awaken to the soft chirping of birds filling my room. I would rustle in my blanket until I was facing the two that sang me perched in the windowsill. I'd lay in bed until their song was over and I was able to start my day. But their song carried more than just a pretty tune. They brought me predictions. One of the birds was a dove. Its beautiful snow-white feathers caught the light of the sun so gracefully. Its bright blue eyes, deeper than any ocean, would observe me as I listened to its song. The dove always sang first, and within its song would be the prediction of something good that would happen in my life. The birds didn't actually say anything, but when their song reached my eardrums, the predictions acted like memories. I could recall things that happened that day, even though they hadn't happened yet. The other bird was a raven. Its ruffled feathers were darker than the spaces between the stars and seemed to soak up the sun. It had beady red eyes that reminded me of the blood moon. After the dove was done, the raven would sing. When his song reached me, I would have a memory of something bad that was going to happen that day. No one ever believed me about the birds. I would try to call my parents into the room as they were singing, but my parents never saw them, even if they were in the room at the same time, so my parents started referring to them as imaginary friends. Since no one else ever saw these birds, I started to believe them. It didn't matter what I believed, though. The birds would continue to visit me like clockwork and tell their tales. Their predictions always came to pass. When I was younger, the predictions were simple and generally innocent, like when the dove sang that the school would be serving pizza for lunch and the raven retorted that I would get a paper cut in math class. Sure enough, I would walk to school and at lunch I'd be given 2 slices of pizza. I'd be so content from lunch that I would carelessly pull out my textbook from my paperback and a loose page would slice my finger open. It just goes to show you how simple middle school really was. Even back then, bad news wasn't typically that bad. The cut hurt, but it healed in no time. The dove even told me the next morning that I'd get ice cream for being such a brave little girl. The raven said I'd forget my pencils at home. Even if the predictions were things I could easily alter, I never seemed to be able to. Like the day I just mentioned, I made a note to grab my favorite pencil before I left. I was so focused on remembering to do it that eventually, I sort of just thought that I did until I got to school and discovered no pencils in my backpack. As I grew older, I came to understand that what the birds considered to be good or bad news was relative to my outlook. For example, when I moved with my family and was forced to attend a new high school 2 years into my high school education, I was a bit of an outcast. You know the story. New kid in school becomes the target of ridicule from the queen bee. The queen was named Casey Matthews, and I grew to hate Casey. One morning, I sat up in bed and listened to the day's news. When I heard that Casey Matthews was going to fall in gym, I was a bit surprised. I thought it was weird that the raven went first, as the dove always took the lead. When I turned to the birds, however, the raven had just started its song and told me that I got a failing grade on the science test. I didn't want to think that I was the type of person who would relish in another person's pain, so I dismissed it as a fluke. I had done worse than just getting a failing grade on my test. I had gotten the lowest score in class and was called out by the teacher for it. I could hear Casey snickering to her friends at the other end of the room. They put me in such a foul mood as we shuffled off to gym class. We had to play basketball, something I was no good at. Everyone was running back and forth as I slowly paced from one end of the court to the other. I was watching Casey like a hawk. I wasn't even thinking of the prediction, I was so fed up with her attitude. Even as everyone was trying to play the game, she mocked some of the heavier students, all while barely participating herself. She caught me looking at her and I shot her a fake smile. She rolled her eyes and turned away. As she turned, the basketball whipped by her head, and while it didn't hit her, it did throw her off balance. I watched as Casey Matthews frantically attempted to keep herself upright, but only managed to make the fall even worse. Her legs flew out from under her, and even though she was able to put her hands in front of her face, the meeting between her face and the ground was audible throughout the large room. I couldn't help but genuinely beam at the event, biting my lip to stifle the laughter that was trying to crawl out. A few of the students ran over to her to help her up, and when they pulled her face from the floor, thin trails of blood trickled from her nose. Even from where I was standing, I could tell it had broken and would create a nasty yellow bruise all over her face. That made me happy. The dove knew it was something worth singing about. Casey Matthews was a bitch. Up until now, I have kept the appearances of my birds to myself, ever since my parents labeled them as imaginary. Lately, however, I'm becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the songs they've been singing to me. Just about a month ago, I lost my mother to an extensive battle with cancer. I knew before I even left the bedroom that she had died. The raven made sure of that. What did the dove sing for that day? That my mother was no longer going to suffer? Guess one event can carry multiple weights. After she passed, I and my dad tried to carry on. It was hard to live life without her, but we decided that she wouldn't want us to dwell. The birds were kind to me. The dove would sing of something grand that would take place, like my uncle taking me on a short road trip. The raven song would carry only small irritations, like getting something stuck in my teeth. I needed time to heal, and the birds knew that. Until my father got sick too. Only 2 weeks after my mom had passed, he started going in and out of consciousness and had to be hospitalized. I was so angry. I still am so angry. I couldn't understand why I would have to lose one parent only to watch the other start to fade. I became bitter from all of this and would lay in bed, clutching the fabric of my sheets, and when I woke in the morning, I would hear the birds singing. The dove would sing to me that 4,307 people were going to die in a car accident that day. I was shocked that this was something that the dove would tell me until the raven informed me that Dad had to spend another week in the hospital. I'd have to suffer another week without my dad at home, but he wouldn't be driving home that day like he was supposed to. The news boiled down to, a lot of people are going to die today, but your dad won't. The way it was delivered is what worried me, and it only got worse. The next morning, the dove told me that I would get a present in the mail, and I was pleased that the dove's song was actually pleasant. The raven, however, informed me that I wasn't the only one that could hear their songs. I was perplexed, but I couldn't do anything about it. I can't converse with the birds, I can only listen. I wondered why that would be bad news. When I went to leave the house, I saw the present the dove mentioned sitting right outside the front door. A small package poorly wrapped in hideous green and blue paper that was dotted with various snowflakes. I brought the gift inside and pulled the paper away from the box, sliding a knife through the tape that held it shut, but I revealed the contents. I stood for a while looking at the snow-white feather that laid on the brown cardboard, a feather that held the light of the sun with a familiar grace. The day flew by. I could only think about the songs I heard in the morning, about who else was listening to the songs. I became so concerned that something was invading this moment that I thought made me special. These birds were mine and no one else was supposed to listen to them. I wanted to get home. I wanted to sleep so I could try and get more information from their songs. With the help of a few sleeping pills, I was able to get to bed earlier than usual. My dreams were vivid. They were of the dark, but the dark was made from the feathers of the raven. They danced by me and tickled my face until I sprang up in my bed. Immediately, I turned to the birds sitting on the window as the dove began to sing. It told me that I was going to live to see another morning, and the raven informed me that it was getting closer. I got up from my bed and started walking towards the window, but as I approached, the birds took off and vanished from my view. I stood and watched out of my window. The world was unmoving, like nothing wanted to earn my ire. Looking down at the windowsill, I observed something that I had never noticed before. The tips of my fingers ran over the small grooves that had been etched into the wood by the birds taking off and landing every day. I knew then that they weren't just something from my head. The birds are tangible, but other people just don't see them. Foolishly, I had forgotten that the news of the birds deliver me is based on my state of mind and what's relevant to me. So as I continued to stress over what the raven was referring to, they continued to sing about it. The dove was right. I had lived to see another morning, several in fact. Another few days went by and now here I am. In the past few days, the songs were something like this. The dove sang that I wouldn't have to water the garden, which was true. The rain that day did it for me. The raven told me that it was going to find me that day. I don't know if that played out, but the raven was no liar. The next day, the dove told me that my dad was going to call. He did. He told me how proud of me that he was and that he hopes that he gets well enough to come home soon. The dove sang that I wouldn't have to water the garden, which was true. The rain that day did it for me. The raven told me that it was going to find me that day. I don't know if that played out, but the raven was no liar. The next day, the dove told me that my dad was going to call. He did. He told me how proud he was and that he hopes that he gets well enough to come home soon. The raven sang to me while I was fidgeting with the feather that had been delivered to me, that I was going to forget to lock the back door, which I regrettably did. When I left the room after those songs, I walked downstairs to find tracks of mud all through the house leading to my door. I couldn't decide on what the tracks were. They didn't look like anything a human could leave behind, but the path it took didn't seem like an animal. It ignored the garbage, dirty dishes in the sink and the fridge. All the things I assume a scavenger would be interested in. I couldn't figure out why it had stopped at my door. I still don't know. Yesterday, the dove sang to me and told me that it would always watch over me. The ravens said that they couldn't protect me. The birds didn't leave the window for a while after their songs. They just kept chirping away, like they wanted me to remember what they sounded like. All of yesterday, I did my best to be productive. I went to see my dad. We talked for a long time and he asked about the birds. He asked me what they said would happen. I told him that they didn't really say anything too special. He laughed and then he asked me about the dog. For a minute I was confused. I thought possibly his mind was wandering, so I pressed about it. He told me that before I told them about the birds at the window, I would wake them up every night crying about the dog in my room. He couldn't remember how I described it with my limited vocabulary, only that it was as horrific as a child could make it. He told me he and Mom would console me every night. I started to remember as he went over the details, the memory playing in my head as if sung by the birds. The black pajamas my dad would wear, the white flowing gown Mom would wear to bed. I would run to their room every night. How they both held me and told me that they would always watch over me. My parents tried their best to keep me safe. My mom taught me to see the brighter side of things, and my dad, always stern, taught me the negatives were important too. After my mother passed away, the birds started to get weaker, and with my dad's fading health, I just don't think their songs are loud enough anymore. I left the hospital and returned home to finish cleaning the house, every inch of it spotless. As I sat in my room last night and watched out of the window, I could see in the yard looking back at me. I understood why as a child I called it a dog. That was probably all I could come up with, and even now, I don't know what else to call it. I couldn't see it too well in the dark, but whatever it was hunched over on all fours, but its body was large and looked to have scrapes of skin peeling off of it. The thing's eyes were yellow and glowing like spotlights. I'm glad I didn't have to see it in great detail. I wanted to write this all down before it gets too dark. This morning I woke up and listened to the songs my birds sang to me. I try not to spend all day in bed. I tried to think of some way to go against the predictions, but it never worked before. So I did my best to make peace and try to get down what I could, put it out there. I called my dad and told him I loved him, and now here I am. The songs playing in my head over and over. The raven sang to me that the creature would be in my room tonight like it had been when I was a child. The dove told me that I would be with my mother once more. It was just after 10 p.m. when my coworkers said goodbye to our final few diners, then closed the doors for the night. Being the only spot in Mechanicsburg that served Cuban food, Carlitos could get pretty busy at times, but it had been a slow summer weeknight, so cleanup was nice and easy. I remember flicking through the channels on the little TV behind the bar, searching for something chill to zone out with while I worked, and that's when a late-night cable news segment caught my attention. The news anchor was interviewing some kind of scientist while the segment title at the bottom of the screen said something about asteroids. After turning up the volume, I heard the anchor describe some very distant but very large asteroid field, one that was headed directly for planet Earth. But thankfully, the scientist was quick to explain that this wasn't necessarily cause for alarm. According to him, space rocks hit Earth on a daily basis, but instead of their impact sending us the way of the dinosaurs, they mostly just burn up in the atmosphere until they're relatively harmless pebbles of superheated rock. After a minute or two, it seemed like the segment was more of a late-night slot filler than anything really newsworthy, so I just switched over the channel, then finished up my shift with some dumb TLC show as background noise. As the days went by, more and more news outlets ran stories on a potential meteor shower. Some said the asteroid field was the size of Texas, and that if it remained on its current trajectory, they would make for the most spectacular nocturnal light show in recorded history. It was always a possibility that a few meteors might make it all the way to the Earth's surface, but most of the scientific community agreed that the meteors posed no major serious threat to human life. By that point, the prospect of a huge meteor shower had all the hype of a solar eclipse. A lot of folks were really excited about it, but for the most part, people were just indifferent. That all changed very, very quickly. The meteors were originally estimated to hit Earth's outer atmosphere in late September, but around the beginning of the month, a leaked document from the European Space Agency took the world by storm. The incoming asteroids had slowed down, not by some insignificant amount either. They had slowed down dramatically. Based on their new speed, the debris field was set to come in contact with the Earth's outer atmosphere sometime in early January, not mid-September. I remember that instant change-up in the language. The technical term was now debris field and not asteroid field, because unless they're affected by some outside force, asteroids don't slow down. The masses demanded to know exactly what headed their way, and in response, the scientific community gave a single resounding reply: we don't know. Over the course of the next few weeks, the tension slowly mounted. The debris field came to dominate the 24-hour news cycle, with almost every other major story being relegated to the shortest of segments. Each news channel became a revolving door of astronomers, meteoriticists, and politicians, all opining on what the debris field was made up of, as well as the possible consequences for humanity as a whole. For the most part, people simply watched and waited, doing all they could to remain calm. But then, the first pictures emerged. NASA's Space Telescope had managed to photograph the debris field as it emerged from Mars' shadow. What the pictures showed sent people into a frenzy. To the untrained eye, the photograph looked like someone had thrown chalk dust at a blackboard. It was a pixelated white smudge, dense at one end while thinning at the other. But no one really knew what they were looking at until it was explained to them. Each and every one of those tiny white pixels represented an unknown object the size of 3 football stadiums, and conservative estimates put the number of objects in the tens of thousands. On top of that, the speed at which these unknown objects were traveling had dramatically picked up since leaving Mars' shadow. We were told that a manned spaceflight in Mars would take around 6 to 7 months in total, but the object's new speed meant that they would be with us in just a matter of weeks. And that's when things started to get weird. Celebrity pastors filled out their megachurches, preaching the coming of 100,000 angels, while once ridiculed UFO hunters found their way onto primetime news stations to talk UAPs, Tic Tacs, and little green men. However, since some suggested that the asteroid field may have been slowed by Mars' gravity, a lot of folks still expected nothing but a meteor shower and bemoaned how a click-hungry media was making a mountain of a molehill. Other folks felt drastically different. People quit their jobs, packed up their families, and headed out of the cities. They were just as clueless as the rest of us, but they made up their minds that whatever it was going to be bad. At first, there had been as much excitement as apprehension in the air, but as extremists on either side of the political spectrum were further amplified by social media, panic began to spread. World leaders called for calm, but more and more people became convinced that their governments were concealing the truth in some fashion. Some claimed that additional photographs were being censored by global intelligence agencies, while others argued that the whole thing was just a psyop designed to keep people frightened and compliant. Unrest led to protests. Protests led to riots. Religious leaders urged calm, but their calls fell on deaf ears. Countless people lost their lives as police and rioters clashed, while in other countries, entirely peaceful protests were met with a hail of bullets. It only stopped on the day when they arrived. Come Arrival Day, society didn't come to a complete standstill, but it came real close. A lot of stores had already barricaded their shop fronts, and although a handful of folks continued about their business, most were either glued to cable news channels or had gotten out of the cities altogether. I remember this collective feeling of helplessness. Every crisis humanity has endured over the past 2,000 years has always been met with some kind of response. We'd created vaccines to fight off diseases, formed military alliances to combat rogue nations, and even revolutionized industry to be less harmless to the environment. But when it came to Arrival Day, all we could do was sit and wait, vulnerable and fearful of whatever fate had in store for us. The majority of real-time information came out of the International Space Station, where astronauts tracked the debris field as it steadily drew closer. At first, nothing really captured the public's imagination. It was all just numbers on speeds and sizes. But then, as the objects passed within just a few hundred miles of the space station, the first high-definition pictures were released. And when they were, humanity was left in no doubt as to what it was facing. Each object resembled a huge, dull metal plate. They were almost completely flat, but multi-sided, with both front and rear faces covered with an intricate web of tessellated structures. It was the arrangement of these structures which led astronauts to nickname them mandalas. In fairness, that's exactly what they look like. But mandala was never a name that was going to resonate with the American public. Instead, the name plates began to stick. Throughout the night, the plates began to drift out of formation, spreading out around the globe until they hovered above every major landmass. The world's militaries were already in a state of high alertness, but following the release of the photographs from the ISS, a series of full mobilizations took place. It was still dark in Mechanicsburg when folks started to emerge from their houses, and when they did, they could spot the blinking lights of fighter jet formations patrolling the night sky. But high above them, like a series of new moons had burst to life in the sky, were the plates. I've never felt that kind of terror before, like a deep biblical terror, where I realized that I was living through something truly titanic. The only question was if it meant the beginning of some exciting new chapter in the history of mankind, or the end of our story altogether. Just before dawn, the plates began their descent into Earth's atmosphere. The military began sectioning off vast rural areas suspected of being potential landing sites, as the plates' descent trajectory avoided all major metropolitan areas. This was encouraging in some ways, as it meant a direct attack on populated areas was less likely. But all that space meant only one thing: they intended to land. But then once the plates reached an altitude of around 18,000 feet, they all just stopped, and they stayed there, suspended in midair for the next few days. The Air Force conducted an in-depth analysis of the plates, and at a press conference, they shared what little they were willing to. The plates gave off no heat signature or radiation, and there was no evidence that they were even manned. If they'd spent God knows how long traveling through deep space, it made more sense to send what were basically just big drones. The CIA and Air Force intelligence analysts were still trying to figure out a lot of stuff, and efforts were underway to establish a fully international intelligence sharing operation, but the big question still remained. Namely, why were they here? When the plates showed no obvious signs of hostility, it was like the whole world breathed a collective sigh of relief. But later, after almost a week of maddening inactivity, the sense of unease returned tenfold. Meanwhile, Air Force helicopter pilots were getting more and more confident, flying closer and closer to the 100 or so plates that hovered over American soil. None had any visible weaponry of any kind, nor were there any obvious entrances, and the intricate structural designs had no obvious function besides aesthetic. With the visitors determined to be non-hostile, a number of nations began attempts to establish communications with them. Each tried everything short of smoke signals to get a response, but nothing seemed to work. Then suddenly, the plates began to emit a series of discordant beeps audible on a white band of frequencies. The revelation that the plates were trying to talk back to us sent the media into a frenzy, and by that point, even those that had once been skeptics were glued to their TV sets, watching exhausted anchors deliver headlines while running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline. Within just a few hours, a team of Canadian scientists announced they'd cracked the format. According to them, the beeps were actually a way of communicating numbers, kind of like a numerical Morse code. There were 13 sequences of numbers, each being 13 digits long, and while all started with the same 4 numbers, the remainder varied from sequence to sequence. Intelligence agencies all over the planet tasked their most senior decryption experts with decoding the numbers, and for almost 72 hours, some of the finest mathematical minds on Earth applied the most advanced deciphering techniques known to man. But in the end, it was an intern who cracked the code, and he did it with a handful of Google searches. Why they chose to communicate it this way, I don't know. With technology as advanced as theirs, I don't see why they didn't just go log onto our 5G network and send a freaking email or something. But while decryption experts combed through the codes, searching for equations or patterns, some discovered that each sequence matched the various ISBN numbers of an old philosophy book entitled Utopia. This was followed by the discovery that each of these ISBNs had been assigned to an edition of the book published during or before the year 1977, and this time, it took just seconds for them to figure out the significance. 1977 was the same year NASA launched the unmanned Voyager 1 space probe, whose mission was to explore the deepest reaches of interstellar space. NASA had always hoped that the Voyager recording devices might pick up signs of extraterrestrial life, but few ever expected something to hear us first. Only they hadn't just heard us, they responded, and they were apparently responding with the offer of Utopia. I didn't think things could get any crazier than they already were, not without some kind of full-scale interplanetary conflict. But somehow, they did. And it all came down to that word, Utopia. Were the visitors going to provide us with the means of transforming the planet into an earthly paradise, or did they plan on taking us someplace else? As far as the latter was concerned, the reaction among the vast majority of my friends and family could be summed up in 2 words: hell and no. To us, there was no way anyone in their right mind would just climb aboard some goddamn spaceship, let alone one from some alien that appeared out of nowhere. But then again, a lot of people who aren't in their right mind and faced with such an overwhelming situation, a lot of seemingly logical people started to suggest some very illogical things. As usual, all the crazies started crawling out of the woodwork, set on exploiting people's deepest, darkest fears. In regular circumstances, they might only win the ears of a couple thousand people, but as we've established, these were not normal circumstances. The Heaven's Gate suicide cult made a surprise comeback, with their social media accounts swelling to a few million followers overnight. They were joined in spirit by other radical evangelicals who rallied the faithful to embrace the end of days. Then came the climate change doomsayers who argued that higher beings had come to evacuate us from our dying planet. But honestly, I think most of those who heeded the call were folks who just didn't really have a reason to stick around anymore. They were the tired, the sick, the depressed, the downtrodden. To them, any life was better than the one they had on Earth, and a surprising number of other people felt exactly the same way. Up until that point, nothing about the plate's arrival had come to affect me personally. Everyone was a slave to TV news around that time, myself included, but I still went to work, I still did my grocery shopping, and life went on as normal. But then, I got a call from my younger sister, Lena. We hadn't talked in almost a year, but the moment I picked up, I could tell it was serious. There were a lot of serious phone calls around that time, but this one seemed different. Lena asked me if I was sitting down. I lied and told her I was. Then, with a voice of monotone resigned, she told me that she had terminal cancer. She had 6 months left, 9 if she was lucky, and she had one final favor to ask of me. She didn't want to die in some hospital bed, racked with pain and nausea. Instead, she'd rather take her chances with the plate's offer of utopia. At that time, the meaning of their offer remained painfully ambiguous, but even so, millions upon millions of people around the world had gathered at the assumed landing sites. Some had made the pilgrimage to simply stare up and wonder at the silent, floating monolith, its crest crowned with a wreath of clouds, while others were intent on being the first on board if the rumors of evacuation were true. The mass influx resulted in huge tent cities being set up near the military zones surrounding each plate, and the different factions, if you can call them that, didn't always get along. Along with clashes over politics and religion, theft and violence were rampant, and although the cops tried their best to maintain order, those camps were not safe places to be. I didn't want Lena going within a mile of one, but she'd always been the kind of girl to go her own way, no matter what anyone else had to say about it. If that was the case, the least I could do was make sure that she stayed safe while she was there. We drove up to the flatlands near Lake Erie in mid-November, the site of the nearest plate. Lena had sworn to me secrecy. Even with terminal cancer, certain family members would go to ends of the earth to stop her climbing aboard some alien spaceship. There were periods during the drive where I actually felt contempt for her. She got to just check out, whereas I had to live with the memory and the consequences of having aided her. At one point, the feelings got so intense that I almost turned the car around. But then I remembered looking over at her, asleep in the passenger seat, and when I thought of how much trust she'd vested in me, I knew I couldn't let her down. I'd heard about how crazy the tent cities were, but seeing one up close was a whole different story. I guess people figured that the plates would just pick them up on arrival, but not only were they denied access to the landing sites, the plates just stayed up in the clouds, silent and unmoving. Very few had planned on a long stay, meaning basic essentials were extremely scarce. A bunch of NGOs had set up outreach centers on the outer limits of the camp, and as much as they tried to supply people with what they needed, there just wasn't enough to go around. We made one single attempt to drive through the camp to search for safe places to stay, but after seeing the chaos stretch out for miles around us, we settled on sleeping in my truck on the camp's perimeter to be away from the general crowds. On the drive out of the camp center, haggard-looking campers began begging us for supplies. I just kept apologizing, saying that we had nothing to spare, but as the crowd grew, their begs turned to demands. I had to gun my engine and force my way through a little just to get them to back off, and that wasn't the only messed up thing we saw either. Lots of people were quite clearly on drugs, and at one point, we saw a person dragging a heavy-looking sleeping bag behind them, one that looked like a person was still inside it. Once we reached the camp's outer limits, we started seeing a lot more RVs and mobile homes owned by less fanatical pilgrims. I ended up parking my truck next to this busted-up VW camper van owned by an old hippie named Ron. Ron was in his 70s, and his reasons for being there were similar to my sister's. He'd lived a life full of adventure, and he yearned for one last big one before his journey ended. We stayed there for about a week, following the latest news and watching the chaos unfold out near the military posts. In daylight, you could see all the military helicopters circling the plate in their dozens, while The darkness revealed all the fires dotted around the camps. Small ones mostly, but the occasional big one when someone fell asleep with their camp stove on. There were already an air of doubt that the plate intended to take anyone away, but after having been camped out there for a few weeks, people were starting to grow restless. We heard rumors that a group was planning to attack a military encampment in an attempt to break through to the plate. They figured if they could get a little closer, something might actually happen, and they didn't seem to care who got hurt in the process. I knew that there were people crazy enough to do it, but thankfully, it didn't have to come to that, because one night, the faithful were vindicated, and the plates descended on Earth. The night times in camp were never completely silent. If it wasn't the wind or the rain keeping you awake, it was someone laughing or crying or screaming. I tried to stay up most nights, as long as I could anyway, just to keep watch while Ron and my sister got some sleep. They got real bad towards the end too. Folks weren't just stealing food or water anymore. People were coming in from the outside to prey on the vulnerable. So when I heard a bunch of people shouting, I figured it was just another fight or robbery. Yeah, the voices went from dozens to hundreds to thousands in number in just a matter of seconds. And through the buzz of activity, I heard shouts of, "It's landing! It's landing!" In the darkness, you could see all these flashlights coming to life as people emerged from their shelters and headed to the sectioned-off area. When I returned to the truck, Ron and Lena were awake and they asked if what people were shouting was true. Ron said that there had been false alarms in the past, and people had been injured or detained when they rushed to the soldiers guarding the area before. I was faced with a difficult choice: sit out the rush and risk losing Lena her spot, or join the crush and risk everything. Within seconds, I had my answer. Thousands cried out in unison as the plate was suddenly caught in the military spotlights. It was indeed descending to Earth, and it was doing so in complete silence. I looked at Lena, hoping she'd change her mind at the moment of truth, but she didn't. She just kept her eyes on the gargantuan alien spaceship that slowly drifted downward and told us it was time to go. Ron offered to watch her for me, so that our final goodbye didn't have to be some mad rush of crazies all vying to be the first aboard. I thanked him for the offer, but she was my responsibility. If she got hurt on the way in, I'd never forgive myself. By the time we reached the military checkpoint, the plate looked like it was hovering just feet from the ground. The official policy of the US government was to advise people against boarding the craft, but the White House press secretary rolled out the use of lethal force against those who wished to. Without an idea of the plate's intentions, the soldiers refused to let anyone pass, but right as the tension reached a boiling point, another great gasp rose out from the crowd as the lowest section of the plate slid open and a long metallic-looking ramp extended from the gap. Before the soldiers could even decide what to do, people just swarmed them, and within seconds, thousands of people were running across the open field towards the ramp. What followed was the most excruciatingly heartbreaking moment of my life. I had to say goodbye to my baby sister, forever. There were tears, lots of them, and I didn't so much hug her as just not allow her to leave for a few minutes. In the end, Ron put a hand on my shoulder and told me that it was time to go. As I watched, Ron and my sister walked off towards the ramp. I realized I wasn't the only one who'd said goodbye to someone that night. There must have been hundreds of other people there, all watching the tide of people advancing steadily towards the plate's open maw. It was surreal in the extreme, but the insanity of it all was overshadowed by the raw emotion of saying goodbye to people they loved, kids they'd raised, siblings they'd grown up with. I resigned myself to sitting on a low-rise that lay inside the military zone, watching as the streams of people made their way up the ramp and into the plate. The opening was only barely lit by the spotlights, and the only way of being able to discern the sheer number of people was from all the flashlights. I must have watched thousands upon thousands of people stream into the bowels of that thing. It was like a river of human beings, and the plate swallowed them up by the thousands, until suddenly, the mass exodus suddenly stopped. As the steady tide of moving flashlight beams gradually ground to a halt, some kind of commotion began to break out near the entrance to the ship, and people began to scream. It was impossible to tell what was happening inside, but my first thought was there was simply no more room. That seemed impossible given the colossal size of the plate, but there was nothing we could do except wait and watch, hoping and praying that nothing went wrong. When the ramp started to withdraw, people started to panic. They pushed and shoved, trying to get aboard, but the mass of people wouldn't budge. They fell as one giant mass of screams and tangled limbs, and in their panic, they climbed on top of each other in their attempts to escape. The result was a massive crushing, so dense and terror-stricken that countless people were just suffocated and destroyed. Then, just as silently as they had landed, the plate took off again. Myself and the other spectators bolted for the mass of people, realizing that it might have been our loved ones caught up in the deadly chaos. I remember people limping past me as I cried out for Lena and Ron, and as the dazed and wounded thinned out, the dead and dying came into view. Some were on their feet, still wandering around in shock, while survivors administered CPR to the not-so-fortunate. But in some places, the dead were quite literally piled high. I waited and waited, calling out Ron and Lena's names, but neither was anywhere to be seen. Those whose loved ones were still missing helped sort through the bodies, at least until the military arrived to take over the cleanup. I looked at a lot of the dead bodies that night. Not all of them, but a lot, and I believe that Ron and Lena made it onto the ship. But what they faced once they were inside was another question entirely. There was a brief window on that drive back home where I still believed I'd done the right thing. I'd aided my baby sister in her dying wish, and even though it wasn't what I wanted for her, I loved her enough to let her go. After a week's worth of stress, fear, and sleep deprivation, it's amazing I didn't fall asleep at the wheel. But eventually I made it back home, where I passed out for almost 14 hours straight. I woke up between 8 and 9 at night, totally disoriented, but it didn't take long for the memories of the previous night to come flooding back. Then, what felt like the 1,000th time that year, I settled down in front of the TV with a cup of coffee and my phone and began absorbing as much information as I could. Just like up in Erie County, mass casualty events had occurred at almost every landing site across the globe. But at first, no one had any idea why. Much like myself, it was speculated that each plate had a limited capacity. Once that capacity was reached, they simply withdrew the ramp, closing their doors, and departed. Only, that wasn't the case. The first survivors interviewed were those at the foot and center of the ramp, people who tended to have the least serious injuries. They were the first to mention how the flow of potential passengers hadn't been halted by limited capacity, but rather by people inside the plate who were trying to get out. Yet finding out what they were trying to escape from was a much more difficult task. Due to the height of the fall and the intensity, the vast majority of those closest to the plate's entrance had been killed prior to takeoff. The vast majority, but not everyone. In fact, in some places, those who traveled into the depths of the plate had been able to force their way out again, mostly by climbing over the bodies without being crushed to death in the chaos and panic. The first was a man in Argentina, where the media was poised and ready to interview him once he was well enough to speak. They didn't get their chance. The man bit into his own wrists while nurses had their backs turned, and due to him being kept in medical isolation, no one noticed until it was too late. The second was a Tunisian woman, but after being questioned by military intelligence officers, she was said to have become unresponsive. The last I heard, she was receiving intense psychiatric treatment in the hopes that she'll one day be able to recount her experiences. There might have been many more of these people, but the likes of Russia and China weren't in the business of intelligence sharing, even in the aftermath of such a monumentous event. But if their people were anything like the ones that made onto Western news channels, they knew just as little as we did. We were told that NASA had managed to get an astronaut aboard one of the Arizona plates, and how she had almost $1 billion worth of recording equipment strapped to her. NASA lost signal almost immediately after she stepped inside, and she was never heard from again. The third survivor was a teenage boy from Indonesia who gave the most comprehensive explanation to date. When the boy woke up in his hospital bed, a group of hazmat suit-wearing generals began asking him what he'd seen. According to his parents, he had once been a happy, outgoing boy. Now he was almost entirely nonverbal. It took 18 hours of questioning and therapy before the boy could even talk, and when he did, the world listened in horror. When asked what was inside the plate, the boy only replied with darkness, and how those who wandered into it were lost. The boy said he could hear screams coming from the darkness, screams of fear, screams of pain, but something else too, skittering so large and inhuman that it almost scared him to death. After that, his memory seemed to fail him altogether. As time went on, more and more of the interviewed survivors would talk of something in the darkness, and how even their flashlights couldn't seem to penetrate the inky void. No one could be categorically sure of what happened to those who made it inside, but one thing was clear. It was nobody's idea of utopia. It was estimated that up to 100 million people departed the planet that night, almost 1.3% of Earth's entire population, and not a single soul knew where they'd been taken or what had befallen them inside the plates. On the drive back home, I told myself that Lena and Ron were okay, that they made it to a utopia, and that I'd done the right thing. But I don't believe that anymore. I want to, but I can't. I understand that the plate's method of deep space transportation may have been beyond our imagining, and that our collective fears might well be derived from that unknown. But then I pictured Lena, alone in the darkness, spending her final few moments gripped by a terror I can't even comprehend. People had once hoped that the plates would help us make a better world, but they left us weak, dazed, and heartbroken. I'm as good as dead to those I kept Lena's secret from. And at nights, I find myself gazing up at the lights in the sky, hoping that one day they'll come back for me, too. The year is 1979. You are a newly employed journalist at the Spokesman Review, a daily broadsheet newspaper based in Spokane, Washington. For the past 6 months, you've been kept firmly in what's referred to as the kiddie pool. Your managing editor has given you nothing but inconsequential feel-good stories, and you've been begging him for something more substantial. Then, after tasking you with writing another piece of dog bites man journalism, you decide that you've had enough. You march into his office, demanding a chance to prove yourself, and for your sins, he gives you one. You're given the unenviable task of writing a 2,000-word article on the Twin Lakes murders of 6 years prior. The crime remains unsolved and has become a subject of extreme controversy in the region for several different reasons. Firstly, the victims were 3 college girls on a weekend camping trip. Captioning the yearbook pictures of 3 young women with the words "brutally murdered" was always going to generate attention. But the thing that really caught people's attention was the manner in which they were killed. 2 of the girls were so badly mutilated that they could only be identified by their dental records, while the third's relatively minor dismemberment suggested the killer had been interrupted in the act. This prompted state police officers to launch a public appeal, urging this mystery witness to identify themselves, but sadly, nobody ever came forward. Finally, after almost a year of stagnant investigation, an arrest was made. About 2 miles north of Twin Lakes lay the rundown log cabin home of one Robert Howard Colby. Colby was 76 years of age at the time of the murders and had been suffering with chronic breathing difficulties since middle age. His lack of vigor and mobility meant Colby was never seriously considered a suspect, at least until his alibi for the night of the murders fell through. Colby claimed to have spent the night at a dive bar over near Pinky City and hadn't returned home until the early hours of the following morning. He confessed to driving while intoxicated, and a handful of barflies seemed pretty sure that Colby had stopped by at some point during the evening. Yet right as the cops were about to take him off their list of potential suspects, they were approached by a bartender who had been working the night of the murders. This bartender claimed to be familiar with Colby and confirming that he was indeed a regular patron. But on the night of the Twin Lake murders, Colby had not visited the bar, and despite the testimonies of its juiced-up patrons, the bartender had the security camera footage to back it up. When confronted with a lie, Colby became uncooperative, refused to speak without the presence of an attorney, and was subsequently arrested. However, coupled with the complete lack of forensic evidence, Colby's long-standing disability meant no prosecutor was willing to bring a case against him. In all fairness, it seemed a physical impossibility that a man who dragged an oxygen tank around would be capable of such vigorous acts of mutilation. Yet after eliminating every other suspect, both probable and improbable, Colby's remained the only name on the list. You plan to befriend the now 82-year-old Colby under the guise of finally clearing his name, but if any of new evidence is uncovered, if your hard work can make any kind of break in the case, it will no doubt catapult your name to journalistic stardom. The first stage of your plan involves re-interviewing as many of the case's key players as possible. It'll no doubt be a lengthy process, but it'll give you plenty of time to pursue the second and third stages. The second is to track down the location of Colby's cabin, or at least obtain some kind of cell number, while the third involves petitioning the Stevens County Sheriff to allow you to review evidence taken from the scene. Contacting the friends and family of the victims amounts to picking at wounds that are yet to heal, with half of them hanging up or slamming their door in your face at the mere mention of being a journalist. The ones that do talk tell you the same old story. The girls had no enemies, no jealous exes, and no history of criminality. The reason for their murders remained a mystery. You have considerably more luck with the Stevens County Sheriff's Department, who invite you over to their Colville headquarters to look at the evidence. They're only too happy for you to reopen this particular can of worms. They need all the help they can get. A helpful deputy carries out 4 bags of evidence, 3 large and 1 small. The 3 larger bags contains the girl's clothing. 2 sets are almost completely shredded and caked in a layer of desiccated gore, while the 3rd set remains somewhat intact. The 4th bag contains just one tiny item, a severely blemished coin attached to a broken necklace chain. The deputy tells you it's a Morgan dollar and that it belonged to the least mutilated of the 3 girls. Minted in 1878, one side boasted the shiny face of Lady Liberty. The reverse had once depicted the olive branch and eagle, and it now appeared as if it had been worked over with a blowtorch. According to the girl's parents, it was a gift from a grandparent following a visit to Nevada in the early 70s. As far as they knew, it had been pristine until the day she died, and nothing seemed to account for its disfigurement besides some mysterious source of white-hot heat. But if that were the case, where were the burns on the victim's body? Details of the Morgan dollar were never released to the public for fears the media would fixate on a relatively minor detail of a much larger picture. Yet according to the detective who worked the case, the Morgan dollar was the key. It was the last unexplored avenue. Work out how the coin became disfigured, and everything else will fall into place. You puzzled over it for weeks as you slowly ran out of people to question, until finally, all that was left was to interview Colby. By this point, Colby is practically bedbound and received assistance from 2 assisted living nurses 4 times a week. The fact he survived so long with such an advanced pulmonary condition is something of a medical miracle, and it seems only a matter of time before he takes any secrets to the grave. You must secure an interview, and you must secure it soon. Despite his initial suspicions, Colby eventually agrees to a sit-down interview. He is clearly motivated by a desire to clear his name, perhaps as a way of clearing his conscience before finally meeting with his maker. Colby's cabin is difficult to find. He strikes you as a man who doesn't want to be found, but find him you do, and when the time comes, he's ready. Colby welcomes you into his small, secluded cabin. He lives as a hermit now, the oxygen tank now an extension of himself. He agrees that there were inconsistencies in his initial story, that he must have gotten confused regarding the dates in question. His condition makes him tired. Tired people forget things. You ask him where he was on the night of the Twin Lake murders, and he replies by telling you he doesn't remember. You detect an honesty about his answer, yet still he conceals something. You ask him if he knows who committed the murders. Colby is silent for a moment. His bottom lip quivers almost imperceptibly. Then, just when he seems on the verge of revealing a deep, dark secret, he simply shakes his head and remains quiet. There are no more questions to ask, at least none that Colby will answer. And before you leave, there is one final line of inquiry to exhaust. You ask Colby if you can shake his hand, and in response, he raises a feeble arm and holds out an open palm. But instead of shaking it, you pull something from your pocket, and when you thrust the small, flat object into Colby's palm, he gasps. You see, the night before your meeting with Colby, somebody placed an envelope in your mailbox. The next morning you opened it, and inside, you found an 1878 Morgan dollar, one made almost entirely of pure silver. Accompanying the small coin was an anonymous note. "Make him touch it," it read. Following Colby's gasp of pain, you hear a faint sizzle, then your nostrils detect the telltale smell of burning flesh. Colby jerks his hand out of your grip with a sudden and surprising strength, the silver dollar falling to the ground. He looks down in his trembling palm, a small circular burn now visible on his withered, leathery flesh. When his gaze returns to you, you recoil in horror. His eyes look different. His face looks different. He is changing. You run, faster than you ever ran in your life, out of the front door of the cabin and back towards your car. Terror has made an animal of you. You reach your car, plunging your hand into your pocket, trying to retrieve your car keys. Your heart beats in your ears, the loud thump, 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 matching the sound of the eldritch paws that pursue you. In an instant, you find yourself toppling to the ground, feet taken out from under you. You try to stand, but you can no longer feel your legs, and as you sit up, you realize that the reason you can't feel them is because they're no longer attached to your body. They're laying in a crumpled heap. Several feet away and crouching over them is Robert Howard Colby. Only it's not Colby, not anymore. What you see, your final sight on this earth before you slip off into oblivion, is the same thing that killed those college girls on that full moon night back in 1973. In the year 1803, Captain William J. Holcomb of His Majesty's Royal Navy received orders to set sail for the coast of Spanish Argentina. It was an era of almost continual warfare, a time when Britain crossed swords with enemies both old and new. But with regards to Imperial Spain, 1803 marked a brief window of peace between two major wars. The Admiralty wished to take advantage of what he was sure would be a short and volatile ceasefire, and so Captain Holcomb was dispatched on a top-secret reconnaissance mission. Disguised as a team of civilian naturalists, Holcomb was to sail a 40-man clipper along the coast near Montevideo, mapping out potential rest and repair stations as he went. Holcomb and his crew set sail in August of 1803 aboard a 75-foot clipper named the Iranon. A dispatch dated that November spoke of steady progress being made, but following its delivery, nothing more was heard from Captain Holcomb or his crew. Assuming the Iranon was lost, another vessel was dispatched to search for survivors, but neither the Iranon nor its crew were ever recovered. The fate of Holcomb and his crew remained a mystery for almost 220 years, until just recently, when a museum employee made a shocking discovery in some woodland near Uruguay's eastern coastline. It was a lockbox, sealed and hidden for more than 2 centuries, and inside it was a small leather-bound journal. The journal was discovered to have belonged to a Royal Navy midshipman named John Pullings, who had served under none other than Captain William J. Holcomb aboard the long-missing Iranon. The journal was immediately airlifted back to London, where for almost a year, it has remained under lock and key at Britain's Naval Intelligence Headquarters in Whitehall. Until now. The following is an abridged version of Midshipman Pooling's journal concerning the events of the 5th to the 12th of December 1803. 5th of December 1803. Discovered a small Portuguese trading post near the mouth of Lake Patos. Patos was big enough to shelter a large fleet, while Sailor's Island would make a fine stopover, but we push on into Spanish waters to complete our undertaking. A team of naturalists from the British Museum sail with us, ignorant of the fact that they serve only to cloak our true intentions. After conversing with a local fisherman, one of their number petitioned Captain Holcomb to sail for a small coastal village, as nearby sits an aquatic eldritch phenomenon. The locals call it Lagoa Negra, which I'm told means the Black Lagoon. If the wind holds, we'll arrive by morning. 6th of December, 1803. The local fishermen were correct, and the naturalists are elated. 3 miles inland lay an astonishing sight, a vast lagoon at least 10 miles wide with water clear as crystal, but with a bed as black as coal dust. It appeared as a powder burn on the otherwise verdant landscape, and the naturalists intend to return at dawn to collect samples of the obsidian-like glass which lines its bed. However, Mr. Andrews, the ship's carpenter, grumbles that the place is cursed, and now the naturalists doom us by disturbing it. Most of the senior officials dismiss Mr. Andrews' claims as mere flights of fantasy, but below deck, his words hold a great deal more credence. In days past, Andrews lost an eye whilst doing battle with the French, yet the crew believed that while Providence once saw fit to take something away from Andrews, it also granted him something in return. Now, Andrews not only sees what is and what was, but also what has yet to pass. Of course, such nonsense is typical of the lower ranks, but at sea, such superstitions must be respected, at least if one is to avoid courting a mutiny. In the meantime, our eyes remain peeled for any Spanish or French warships. 7th of December, 1803. Perhaps the most testing day of my career thus far. At dawn, a small shore party escorted the naturalists to the lagoon. The remainder of the crew occupied with regular duties. An unease over the lagoon was assuaged by Captain Holcomb, who promised that no samples would be brought back on board, but crew remained unsettled. Shore party returned midday with naturalists claiming to have uncovered some variety of submerged cavern. They sought the assistance of men with diving experience, but none volunteered until the professor promised to generously grease the man's palm upon our return to Portsmouth. A deckhand from the county down named Parkhill reluctantly volunteered, and together they returned to the lagoon. 7th of December 1803 continued. Shortly after 4 bells, a deckhand returned to the ship to raise the alarm. There had been an accident at the lagoon, and Parkhill had been dragged unconscious from murky waters. When we arrived bearing a stretcher, we found him in a terrible state. The flesh of his face and neck were horribly swollen and ran with a network of inky black capillaries. His eyes, riddled with the same Stygian pox, bulged from their sockets, and he struggled to breathe as he slipped in and out of consciousness. Once back on deck, the ship's doctor had us immediately place Parkhill down so he might try to clear his airway, and in doing so, a large amount of thick, black bile was expelled from his gullet. His treatment continues in the infirmary as I write this, and though the crew pray for his recovery, his prognosis is dire. The doctor simply had not seen anything like it before. As a precaution, Captain Holcomb has ordered that the Parkhill and the doctor be quarantined, and all are forbidden from returning to the lagoon. But I fear that the damage might have already done. 8th December, 1803. Mr. Parkhill passed away during the night. A short funeral service was held, with the captain reading a short Bible verse as crew gathered to pay respects. There was melancholy, but also relief. The doctor displayed no symptoms of that which manifested itself so swiftly in Parkhill, meaning his body poses no danger to a potential burial party. Captain Holcomb ordered 3 men to row Parkhill's body out to stronger currents to afford him a proper burial at sea. They departed late in the morning, but the hour of their expected return has come and gone, and the burial party are nowhere to be seen. All are deeply unsettled. It seems impossible that the 3 sailors in a boat could simply vanish in broad daylight. Theories differ from man to man, but when old Mr. Andrews said, "The lagoon took them," and I'm ashamed to say his words sent a chill through me. 9th of December, 1803. Deeply disturbing discovery this morning. Mr. Parkhill's burial shroud floated past the ship's aft. First mate pulled it from the water to find that the stitching had been cut, clean and deliberate. A weight of hope had been restored, but desperation for answers has also fueled wild speculation, and talk of sea monsters is rife among the crew. I put no credence in such tales, but I cannot help but wonder of the burial party's fate. We remain anchored in place for the next 24 hours. Search parties will be sent out in the morning. We pray for our comrades' safe return. 10th of December, 1803. Another disturbing encounter this morning. No luck recovering the burial party, but came across a group of native tribesmen keen to trade. They joined us on our return to the ship, but became extremely agitated upon discovering where we were anchored. Captain Holcomb tried to calm the men down, but they twice pointed off in the direction of the lagoon before uttering loud, frightened but unintelligible protests. When the Southerly Patrol reported back with no sightings of the burial party, Captain Holcomb ordered us to set sail immediately. He too is now convinced of the lagoon's danger, and much to the approval of the crew, he seeks to distance us from it. God willing, should our missing comrades have survived, we can return them to the ship on our homeward journey. I and some others remain optimistic of this outcome, but the lower ranks seem quite sure that something deeply unnatural is at work. The 11th of December, 1803. Anchor dropped just after nightfall. Another double watch, more uneasy sleep. What little rest I had was disturbed by the screams of a watchkeeper who was found frightened half to death at his post. When asked what had startled him so, the watchkeeper claimed to have sighted none other than Mr. Parkhill standing on the foredeck. Having sailed with him for years, the crewmen recognized Parkhill's face instantaneously, but the way in which he moved was far from familiar. There was no life behind Parkhill's eyes, and his movements were clumsy, as if he were the marionette of some unseen being. Fear and urgency propelled him to raise the alarm without further questioning, but when the other watchkeepers ran to the foredeck, Parkhill was gone. After any suggestions of illusion or delusion was violently dismissed by the terrified watchkeeper, we searched the ship from top to bottom, but neither Parkhill nor the other missing sailors were anywhere to be found. Fearing that further exhaustion will only worsen the situation, Captain Holcomb ordered us back to quarters. The few take to their bunk with ease. 11th of December, 1803, continued. Terrible news. Mr. Andrews was discovered to be missing at 3 bells. Captain Holcomb ordered another search, and this time we found something. Mr. Andrews' glass eye was found in the stores, still sticky with his blood. The trail led below deck where Andrews' remains were discovered. It appears something had been consuming him. Armaments had been distributed throughout the crew, and I didn't think that I could see them any more frightened. But then 2 deckhands went below to clean up what remained of poor Mr. Andrews. They re-emerged moments later, claiming they'd heard something move on the hull's exterior, and when the captain entered the hold to confirm it, he heard it too. The sails have been raised, the anchor is dropped, and the crew is in the process of scouting the exterior hull for any unwanted passengers. But so far, nothing had been found. Captain Holcomb is now very keen to depart the area, but some feel what plagues us is hiding upon the very ship we sail upon. 12th of December, 1803. Came ashore at the Cape of Polonio. Captain Holcomb has ordered the ship set ablaze, and never in my life have I been so frightened, yet so without knowledge of what I am frightened by. Just after first light, a deckhand named Collins climbed the mizzen to wax the rigging. He came tumbling back down just moments later, minus his head. Something was up there, having wound itself around the top gallant in a horribly unnatural manner. Mr. Collins had disturbed it, and he had answered with his life. At first, we plotted to smoke the thing out before shooting it, but after getting a better look at it from each adjacent mast, Captain Holcomb ordered the Iranon to be scuttled with oil and match. No one knows what has plagued us these past few days, but the ordeal has renewed the faith of even the most jaded of Christians. Nor do we know how we'll be returning to England, but all agree that a march through poisonous forests is preferable to another moment with that thing aboard. Now we watch the ship burn, uncertain of our future as we say silent prayers that the thing that used to be Parkhill, that creature from the Black Lagoon, will return along with the cursed Iranon. Epilogue. The entry on the 12th of December marks Pooling's final journal entry. The remains of the Iranon and its crew have never been recovered, and their fate remains a mystery. To date, London's Institute of Archaeology has funded 2 separate expeditions to eastern Uruguay. Yet despite the efforts and expertise of the researchers, we are no closer to understanding what happened than we were 200 years ago. Parkhill's initial symptoms are consistent with some variety of venomous sting, but naturally, no toxic substance on Earth would explain the sightings of him following his supposed burial at sea. Some have suggested that disease was to blame, and that a hallucinating Poolings made for an imperfect narrator, while others have purported that ergot poisoning had affected the minds of the Iranon's crew. Yet there is another school of thought, which instead points to the lagoon as the cause of the Iranon's destruction. They believe that Pooling's final entry are not the words of a madman or those of hysteria, and that the blame lies squarely with that creature from the Black Lagoon. It started out innocently enough. I was reading on the bed while my boyfriend Charlie was playing on the computer with his friends. I don't play many games, so it's interesting to listen to the things he says to his friends, even if terminology goes over my head sometimes. There will be moments when I'll be focusing on something and he'll just spout off words that sound extraterrestrial. I'll just laugh it off and continue with what I was doing. It wasn't my thing, but he enjoyed it and it wasn't hurting anyone, initially. Like I said, I had my nose between the pages reading about various armchair philosophies as Charlie raved on in the background playing Call of Duty, I think. He had won a match and swiveled his chair to face me, like a dog when they did a trick right. "Finally got a win tonight," he exclaimed, more for himself than for me. "Well, that's great, babe," I replied, offering an admittedly false smile. I was happy that he was happy, but I can't say that I was invested. He turned back to the computer and talking to his friends again, they were hyping each other up. I heard Charlie mutter, "Now that was poggers." It was such a random word that it tickled my brain when I heard it and I couldn't help but laugh. Charlie leaned back in his chair as if he was exhausted himself as he swiveled to face me once more. "I can't believe I just said that unironically." He echoed my laughter, offering a painfully adorable smile. "I feel like I should wash my mouth out with soap." He repeated the word a few times, making sure he let out popping noises when mouthing the P. We both laughed it off, and he said goodnight to his friends. It was time for me to get some quality time with him, and with that, my book remained on the nightstand until morning. In the morning, I woke up early and felt like I had gotten a really good sleep, so I was in a good mood. And when I'm in a good mood, I make breakfast. I heard the stairs creak and figured the smell of bacon had lifted Charlie out of bed. He stumbled into the kitchen, his hair a complete mess. "That smells poggers," he groggedly moaned. With mild amusement, I went to laugh. Charlie's face conveyed confusion as he stood in the kitchen, his eyes strained and mouth still slightly agape. I totally meant to say great." He continued, turning his gaze to me. "God, I'm tired." He chuckled before shuffling over to help me finish up the breakfast. The rest of the day was pretty normal. We even decided to go on a little impromptu date, the best we could with the world the way it is right now, at least. But when we were winding down for the night, getting ready to brush our teeth, Charlie informed me that today was poggers, babe. I politely replied that he was trying to mess with me, and it was starting to get old pretty fast. He shook his head. Sorry, it just kind of came out, sorry, he said, raising the toothbrush and dragging it across his teeth. We both brushed our teeth and in unison spit into the sink. As I was wiping my mouth, I could see Charlie leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head, but when I met him face to face, a putrid smell climbed into my nostrils. It was enough to make me recoil away from him. It was like battery acid poured over rotting roast beef. I instinctively put my hands over my nose. "Oh, your breath is awful," I told him, which we both knew was odd. He had just brushed his teeth, and it was not like he had gingivitis or anything like that. He went to point out as much by pointing to the sink, but stopped. I followed his cue and looked into the sink where he had spit out our toothpaste. On my side of the sink, there was a few lingering bubbles. On his side of the sink, however, still clinging to the white porcelain, was a thick and frothy substance. It was a sickly yellow with streaks of red that would suggest Charlie's dental hygiene had degraded significantly in just one night. He quickly reached over and turned the faucet on. Opening his mouth, he checked out the condition of his teeth, and they looked completely fine. It took a good bit of water for the mess that he had spit into the sink to bulge it all. Eventually, with the convincing of steaming hot water, it disappeared. I went to say something to him, but he was captivated by his reflection with his mouth moving ever so slightly, his lips quietly repeating the P sound over and over. I told him that we should just go to bed and we'll make an appointment to see the dentist, make sure something weird wasn't going on with bacteria or something like that. We made our way to bed and settled down for the night. With the lights turned off and the dark of a sleeping world creeping in, I closed my eyes. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I was woken slowly by a small prodding on my shoulder. Charlie was ever so gently poking me, like a child who wants their parent to wake up on Christmas but is afraid to make them angry. I shuffled my body. Still coming out of the throes of deep sleep, my body was sluggish and the blankets felt like they weighed 30 pounds. As I turned over, I reached behind me to flick on the light, and the sudden brightness momentarily stunned my vision. I started wiping my eye and was about to ask what was wrong when a very familiar and pungent smell assaulted my senses again. It was worse this time, like it had been sitting for a while. I struggled to keep my urge to vomit subdued. This was made all the more difficult when I moved to brace my new position and felt my fingers press against the sheets. As my fingers pressed down, a hot and viscous liquid rose from the divots I had made. Then I saw Charlie. His face had that sickly yellow shit caked on his face. He looked like an infant that fought hard against eating his baby formula. His mouth was moving and words were coming out, but just barely. His voice was raspy. I could tell they were painful. His body would tremble every time he started to speak. Such a horrid sight, watching each letter accompanied by a small spittle of the disgusting liquid, and before long I could see how it was about to get worse as he kept going. Poggers. I could see thin trails of smoke lifting from inside his mouth and under his lip. Horrified, I hadn't moved my hand yet, but once the new drippings had made their way to my hand, I could feel an intense burning sensation. Charlie started to shake violently as I finally snapped to my senses and ran to the phone. Dialing 911 as fast as I could, I heard Charlie behind me beginning to shout poggers over and over. I could just imagine the molten ooze spewing from his mouth like Yellowstone as he attempted to clear his mouth of the heat. I didn't know what to even say to the operator, so I told the lady that he had severe burns and trouble breathing. Keeping the phone off the hook as the operator confirmed that an ambulance was on the way, I made my way back to Charlie. It was so much worse than I first saw. The blankets on the bed where he was facing away from me were soaked. The liquid had saturated the sheets and bed to the point that They were dripping onto the hardwood. Plumes of smoke rose from the hardwood, threatening to bore right through the floor, but it wasn't my biggest concern. I couldn't help but picture Charlie laying there at night, saying that stupid word over and over, suffering but not wanting to disturb me. He looked so weak. I don't know what that fluid was, but it was taking all the nutrients Charlie needed to function with it. The white of his eyes were beginning to stain yellow like a smoker's walls, and his skin was so visibly dry I thought that he was going to start molting. He barely recognized the man I knew as he rose from the bed, shambling to his feet. It looked like some cheesy zombie flick with a small budget, but seeing it in person, happening to someone I loved, was so painful and scary. I started to worry about my safety as he got closer to me, the same yellow substance dropping from his slack jaw. His eyes were so different. I felt as though he couldn't even see me, he was just heading towards something. "Poggers," a whisper came from his mouth, well-formed letters unfettered by the slob dwelling in his mouth. This voice was ethereal. It didn't even sound like Charlie anymore. Before Charlie closed in, I saw the sanctity of blue and red lights flashing beyond our bedroom window. Quickly, I ran to the front door, letting paramedics in and trying to explain to them what was going on as we headed back up the stairs. Charlie looked so weak, but it took the three of them to subdue him as he fought back. His grotesque saliva burning holes in their clothing, though I don't think they noticed. They made it apparent that I wasn't allowed to go with them as they loaded him into the back of the ambulance. As they drove away, leaving me to my own devices, I could see one of the paramedics pressing a needle into Charlie's neck. And that was that. He was gone. I was left standing there all alone in the dark. Eventually, I made it back upstairs and started cleaning up the mess. Luckily, the piles of bile no longer burned on contact, though the texture was still enough to make me wince. I don't think there was a point in washing anything, so I just pulled the bed with its own covers out to the alleyway and just rested them against the garage. I didn't sleep that night. I was so out of it, I almost didn't hear the phone ringing, someone from the hospital telling me I could visit. I was there in no time. While looking at Charlie, who was still pretty heavily sedated but conscious, I asked the doctor if Charlie had said anything yet. The doctor said it would be difficult for Charlie to speak as he had chewed through his tongue during his night there. Looking at my boyfriend, I could see that even under sedation his jaw was moving up and down. His lips pursed and contorted as if trying to speak. However, with the drugs and the lack of a tongue, all that came out of his mouth were small whistles of air. As I stared at Charlie, I heard something behind me, a commotion caused by another person being rushed into the ER. Turning around, I saw one of the paramedics that had helped get Charlie into the ambulance rushing down the hall. So many people were talking at once, and I'm sure I must have been the only one to hear it. The ambulance driver speaking low under the mutter of voices and the chaos of chirping machinery. This is not Poggers. My name is Abdullah Ayub. I am from Hawija, Iraq. In 2014, ISIS soldiers came to my town, killing anyone who resisted. Torture was common, beheadings were routine. Their sheiks said they'd bring us heaven, but brought us only hell. It was at the hands of ISIS that I lived through the two worst days of my life. The first began the morning my wife left for market. Less and less food was making through the front lines into the market stalls, so I was concerned about the amount of food my wife would be able to bring home. That should have been the least of my worries. There was a commotion in the neighborhood. I could hear people shouting outside our home. I came to understand that the Daesh were about to execute someone and that everyone should go to the town square to witness. There, in view of a baying mob, they held my wife. A Daesh commander was explaining that the Prophet had strictly forbid red clothing, that anyone who disobeyed had to be cleansed. I rushed to prevent the execution. The guards kept me away. The best I could do was to make sure the children didn't see. Then, before my very eyes, they shot her in the head. The second was 2 years later. I had chosen to stay in Hawija for the sake of our 2 twin boys, but as the Iraq army closed in and began to shell the town, the situation became unbearable. We had to escape. I managed to get hold of some sleeping pills from a friend. In the evening, I crushed them up and put them in some milk for my sons. They drank it, and I waited for the chemicals to take effect. When they were asleep, I put my sons on my shoulders and headed out into the night. My plan was to sneak out towards the Iraq army, but it would not be easy, for Daesh had given their snipers orders to shoot any civilians fleeing the city, and as I rushed through the dark city streets, one fired at me. The bullet ripped through my shoulder. One of my boys had been hit. By the time I found cover, it was too late. My son had died. But I couldn't stop. Religious law dictates a body must be buried very quickly after death, so in the rubble and the darkness, I dug a grave by hand and laid my son in it. It was dawn by the time I made it to the Iraqi army positions just outside the city. I was mentally shattered, and there was no sense of victory at all. The soldiers rushed to take my other son from me. But as I sat in the dirt, gulping down water, the soldiers said something that made my heart stop. Chest wound. Kid was killed instantly. Must have been a sniper as they fled. The horrific realization. I had buried my son, alive. My name is Abner Schulman, and I'm a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor. I was a teenager in western Belarus when the Germans arrived at my village. That was the day my entire world ended. It was Armageddon, in the very sense of the word. The non-Jewish villagers helped the invading Nazis to round us up. They had hated us long before they had even heard of Adolf Hitler. Anyone deemed fit to work was thrown into a cramped, freezing rail car and taken to Mali Tristyanets concentration camp, which is where my story takes place. What I believed happened in June of 1944 may have been a figment of my imagination, a grand hallucination, the desperate attempts of a broken man to piece together some kind of meaning amidst pure, unbridled horror and tragedy. I was starving, sleep-deprived, and overcome with grief at the loss of my family and friends. So I'm not about to claim that I maintained a stable mind. Many of my fellow prisoners suffered madness during that time, claiming to have seen and heard all kinds of things during their imprisonment. But as I sit here, in the twilight of my life, I feel like I must relate things that felt as real to me then as writing this does now. The summer of 1944 was a scorching one. My labor gang was given the back-breaking task of digging a canal from the nearby river to the camp itself, all in the sweltering midday heat. We were barely fed, rarely watered, with SS guards only passing out canteens of lukewarm, unfiltered water when men had begun to vomit and pass out from heat stroke. I remember the hunger like it was yesterday, the retching, twisting pain that lived with you on a daily basis. All you could ever think of was to get something to eat. At night, we would dream of feasts, surrounded by family and friends that we would never see again. One afternoon, as the sun was perched high in the cloudless blue sky, one of our fellow prisoners snapped. His pupils dilated, froth forming at the corners of his mouth as he commenced to rant and rave. We tried to calm him down, but it proved impossible. The man was rabid, wild-eyed. He had completely lost his mind. At first, the black uniformed SS guards just laughed, mimicking him in pidgin Russian. This only infuriated the madman as he turned and glared at his detractors, trembling with frenzied rage. "Racha," he growled, drool spilling from his lips as it leaked around his swollen tongue. "Racha, Racha, Racha ist nah, nah!" He screamed, over and over at the guards, laughing as he did so, the maniacal, haunting laugh of a doomed man who had nothing left to give. The guards stopped laughing as they began to comprehend his broken German. They looked at each other nervously as their mockery ceased, but as he continued his tirade, they started to look downright frightened. It didn't take long before one of the guards took out his sidearm, aimed it squarely at the madman's face, and fired a shot. The man collapsed into the canal, blood squirting from the small, rough hole torn through his forehead. We were ordered to dig his grave.
"You the shit rotten,"
the guard hissed, spitting on the body of the dead lunatic. The lunatic whose face was still etched with a feverish smile, even in death. It began the next day. Something was wrong with the river. Something terribly wrong. Much to our relief, all work on the canal was suspended until the situation could be resolved. Information was like a currency in those days. When you have nothing, something as simple as news becomes as valuable as gold. Scrambling for what little we could glean, we finally secured an audience with a member of a working party that had seen the condition of the nearby watercourse.
"It's the heat,"
the man relayed.
"The heat has produced the amount of water making the river muddy and slow. The guards say nothing can be transported using it until the weather is cooled and we get some rain."
A heated argument broke out between the man explaining and another of the labor gang.
"Yes, the color has changed, but it's just clay. Clay is dissolving into the river. This is what changes the color."
But he was an educated man. Many of us were.
"Have you ever seen a river look like that, Isaac?"
the other man argued.
"No, and neither have I. The river ran red. Red, Isaac. Red with the blood of our Hebrew brothers and sisters."
The educated man tried to argue back, but were finished listening. We had escaped the filthy, sweaty work of ditch digging for now. The next morning, as the blazing summer sun rose over cramped wooden barracks, I awoke to a noise I hadn't heard since my childhood. The gentle, steady rhythm of a croaking frog floated through row after row of comfortless wooden bunks. There was just one at first, the faintest of noises, almost relaxing, but it was shortly joined by others, many, many others. Soon hundreds of small olive green amphibians were hopping through the camp. I'd never seen anything quite like it.
"They're escaping the dried up river,"
one prisoner cried.
"Look for another body of water."
We were soon tasked with clearing out the camp, even given a few shovels to bash the small creatures before heaping their broken bodies into waiting wheelbarrows. It was grim work, but it beat digging the canal. And yet as much as we tried, we were unable to stem the tide of frogs that had hopped towards us from the dying river. Those that weren't crushed by swings of our shovels died in the scorching heat of the June sun. Dehydrated and slow, they expired where they lay. To our disgust, the lack of frogs in the nearby river meant that the insect population went unchecked, not to mention that the masses of amphibian carcasses that littered the camp attracted all kinds of maggots and swarming carrion-hungry flies. A particularly aggressive variety of horsefly also invaded the camp at this point, giving the guards a rather rough time indeed. Some of the nastier bites grew inflamed and infected, leaking pale yellow pus and blood when they burst around the exposed flesh. Much to our delight, some of the more spiteful guards were hospitalized in rather serious condition. Yet there was something disconcerting about the selectivity of the biting insects, something that was overlooked in our joy that certain hated guards were suffering. Very few of the affected men were camp prisoners. Yes, I saw one or two men who had been bitten, some rather badly, but to my knowledge, not one of them suffered an infection or any kind of medical complication arising from an insect bite. A week later, the Russian artillery started. The booming explosions of distant shells grew closer as Russian forces began to take back our country, inch by inch. We prayed that the Soviets would liberate us, but the camp guards remained defiant in the face of their annihilation. "Russian dogs," they would joke. "Any day now they'll run out of bodies to throw at us, then we'll turn the tide again. Moscow will be ours by next summer. You just watch." That night, we were awoken by a huge crashing noise that sent the camp guards into high alert. They were terrified that the Russians were attacking. We prayed they were. However, it eventually became apparent that a German light bomber was attempting to return to a nearby airfield after being hit by anti-aircraft fire. It broke up in the skies over the camp, sending debris plummeting to Earth. A section of wing sliced into the guards' barracks, killing several of them. At dawn, we were tasked with cleaning up the mess left by the falling aircraft. As we worked, picking up pieces of pulverized flesh, bone, and cloth uniform, the skies darkened and rain finally broke. It was relief beyond words. Prisoners celebrated under the downpour, chastised by guards that still mourned the accidental death of their comrades. The deluge washed away weeks of sweat and grime, purifying us. For a brief moment, we felt free again. Then, that afternoon, as the temperatures plummeted and an unusual chill danced in the air, a dense fog rolled in. It was the most impenetrable mist I'd ever seen, before or since. You could barely see a couple of meters in front of you. The entire camp was plunged into near darkness, so completely consumed by the fog that they were confined to our barracks for the remainder of the working day. The mist still clung to the camp when we lay our heads down to sleep. Usually, I would fall asleep after peering out of a small gap in the wooden slats of our barracks. I would watch the handful of guards patrolling with their electric torches, inspecting the structures with rifles slung over their shoulders. I tried to memorize their faces, every little feature, just in case there would ever be a day when these men would answer for their crimes. But that night, I saw something that still creeps into my mind on the darkest of nights, keeping me awake, something I've never really cared to rationalize. A figure walked among the barracks, one that didn't wear a uniform or carry a rifle. Due to the fog, they were hard to distinguish, and at first I thought it was an escaped prisoner. I made out ragged clothes and pale complexion that seemed sickly in the dim moonlight. But something was wrong with the way the figure moved. It walked lightly, almost weightlessly, an unnatural stillness to its gait. I fell asleep wondering just who I had been looking at. The following day was our last day in the camp. We awoke to a panic. Still locked in our barracks, we peered through the small gaps in the wooden walls as camp guards rushed around in frenzy. They looked shaken, terrified even, and there seemed to be even less of them than usual.
"There's been an accident," one man exclaimed. "Something about the guards. Many have died during the night."
One guard was openly weeping, sobbing over his oldest brother, who also happened to be a guard at the camp. The other men in black uniforms tried to console him, telling him that passing away whilst asleep is the most peaceful way to go. The surviving SS guards were tense. They were under strength now. There were many, many of us, and very few of them. We sensed it before they even gave the orders. We could feel the atmosphere of terror that gripped the few that remained. We were to be liquidated. We began to break our way out of our wooden prison as the guards began to empty their machine guns into the first barracks, massacring a large number of trapped prisoners. Men threw themselves into the barred door, 2 or 3 at a time, as the rest of us watched in horror as the enraged SS men then set fire to the bullet-riddled building before moving on to the next.
"Come on, Abner. Throw your damn weight into it. Break it open, for the love of God. You try then, old man. Use your own damn body. The door would break you."
The guards were shooting the second locked barracks now, screaming and cursing as they did. They were relishing the slaughter, smiling and laughing as they murdered us. Just as the door in our barracks was beginning to give way, we noticed the door of another burst open, the occupants spilling out into the grim gray light of the foggy morning. They rushed the firing guards, vengeance in their eyes, not caring that they were shot to pieces as they charged. The door finally tore from its hinges in front of me, letting in the smell of blood and cordite in the air. I was weak, starving. I don't know where I summoned the strength to do so, but I ran. I was not alone either. Throngs of prisoners were running with me, pulling at the barbed wire fences, kicking the posts and creating little escape routes for themselves. Some were hit by stray bullets as they tried to flee, collapsing into the mud or
hanging on the razor-sharp wire like twisted marionettes. We could still hear the gunfire as they reached a nearby tree line and disappeared into the woods. After the war, I took a boat to America. Looking up at the Statue of Liberty as our ship approached New York Harbor, I was surprised that I didn't feel the jubilation that I expected to. Guilt. It was guilt that weighed down my happiness that day, wondering why it was I should survive, why so many of us met their ends in the dark, dingy death camps of the Nazis. I have since moved to Skokie, Illinois, where so many others who understand what I have been through have also chosen to make their home. I married, had children, watched them grow up, and have children of their own. I have surrounded myself with love. But I am sad to say this has not restored my faith in humanity. That part of me died in the 40s and was never resurrected. But there is another kind of faith I have not lost, one that is much harder for me to explain fully. I'm not the best Jew. I try to keep kosher, however. God is going to have to explain to me why he forbid us to eat shrimp whilst making them so delicious. I do not observe a lot of our more obscure holidays, but I always celebrate Passover. Every year I remember the spirit of death that passed over Egypt, reaping a terrible vengeance on the people that had kept my people slaves for so long. I may have lost faith in mankind, but I have never lost faith in the power of avenging angels. On the afternoon of July 7, 1865, guards escorted 4 condemned prisoners to the gallows of Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. Each prisoner's ankles and wrists were bound by shackles. More than 1,000 people, including government officials, members of the U.S. Armed Forces, friends and family of the accused, official witnesses, and reporters watched. There, in front of the 1,000-strong crowd, the assassins of President Abraham Lincoln were hanged by the neck until they were dead. There is a famous photograph of the event which depicts a number of soldiers on a walkway that stands over the gallows. However, one of the men on the walkway is not wearing military uniform. He wears a wide-brim hat and civilian clothing. He is smiling. This is the man in the photographs. The man appears in a photo showing the aftermath of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. There he stands, the same wide-brimmed hat and smiling features, present at the event which would snowball and culminate in the deaths of 20 million people. He features in old photographs depicting the panic and horror in the faces of stock traders on Black Friday, 1929. His smile looking disturbingly out of place in the midst of ruined men and broken lives. In photos of Nazi rallies and concentration camp victims, he is there, the same clothes, the same twisted smile contorting his lips. He is there during the aftermath of the Jonestown Massacre, standing among the hundreds of corpses, men, women, and children. He smiles in the background of photographs taken in the wake of the Columbine shooting, his blank eyes and crooked smile in stark contrast to weeping mothers and heartbroken school friends. In amateur footage taken on the morning of September 11, 2001, he is present on multiple occasions, watching the New Jersey Turnpike, smiling as he watches the destruction unfold. The towers collapse, people run screaming from the dust cloud, but the man in the photograph just walks, smiling as he is swallowed up by the all-consuming debris. This morning, I awoke particularly early in time to catch the orange and pink sunrise as it dawned over the Boston suburbs. I turned on the TV, making sure the volume was acceptably low, gazing out the window at the freezing winter morning. It was beautiful, so beautiful that I took out my iPhone and began to take a photograph. The Venezuelan president has warned the U.S. to stay out of its nation's affairs as U.S. Navy warships begin to sail towards the South American coastline. I adjusted the camera settings, ensuring the shades of gold and fuchsia would be captured perfectly by the lens. It's not every morning that such a glorious sunrise rises over Roxbury. Moments like that are worth capturing. Whilst the Chinese premier had promised that any U.S. intervention will be met with swift, decisive military action from the People's Liberation Army, the TV continued. I checked the photo, amazed at how well it had come out. The warm morning light seemed to creep into every little corner of the vista, except one. There was a large bay window a few streets over. It contained the figure of a man. China stated that they were not ruling out the use of tactical nuclear weapons. He wore a wide-brim hat. This is surely a tense time for our nation's armed forces. His smile stretched wide across his face. Boston, Saturday morning. Iron gray clouds blanket the sodden city, another washout New England summer. I pulled the hood of my black jacket over my head a little more to keep the rain at bay, dodging grim-faced pedestrians as I trudged down Shawmut Avenue. I'm headed towards a little thrift store that supports AIDS treatment and prevention, a weekly ritual of mine. I pick up odds and ends, things people need. It feels good spending money there. I pick through the garment racks and the tables loaded with pairs of shoes, seeing little of interest. I peruse cabinets full of knickknacks and curio. A ragged old clown doll stares back at me through rows of dusty porcelain children. I don't like its smile. And just when I think I'm about to leave empty-handed, I spy an old cardboard box near the back of the store. It's full of old VHS tapes. I ask the kindly old lady behind the counter if any of them are for sale. She smiles and nods. 50 cents a tape, she replies. I like her. She knows me. She's kind to me. I proceed to rifle through the videotapes. There are a few old Disney movies, a copy of The Shawshank Redemption, and numerous unlabeled tapes that I assume are just blank. But 3 have had handwritten labels stuck to them. Labels which pique my curiosity upon reading. Cops TV show, unaired footage 1992. Another is dated 1993, the other 94. I've never heard of the show having any kind of blooper reel. It certainly would make for interesting watching, I suppose. It'd also give me an excuse to dust off the old VCR in the closet of my Beacon Hill apartment. I wouldn't be leaving it much this weekend anyway. WBZ has forecasted rain for Friday to Sunday. I take the tapes to the counter, telling the nice lady to keep the change of a 5, then begin the walk back home. The VCR takes a while to set up. I can't find a way to hook it up to my newer digital TVs, so I have to put out an old box TV from the basement of my apartment building. I'm not convinced it'll work, but it does. Soon, the satisfying sound of old mechanisms whirring to life fills the room as I load the tape labeled 1992 into the receiver. I hit pause, grab my smokes and a beer, turn off the lights, and then sit back down to watch. The screen flickers, a static buzzing sound vibrating through the old TV set. But then there's life. There's no intro music, no title sequence. The footage just starts. But it's instantly recognizable. A cop in the driver's seat of his squad car, a cameraman recording him from the passenger seat. The audio and video quality is much better than I expected, so much so that I can make out the cop's distinct New England twang. Lo and behold, the caption says, Lynn, Massachusetts. That's just a few miles up the road. The footage skips. The next scene is of a traffic accident. A car is crumpled and smoking, having smashed into a tree by the side of the road. The driver is dead in the passenger seat. Another body lies in the middle of the road, covered by a cop's winter jacket. 2 deceased out here. Perp still in the car. Victim is laid out on the road. A cop is talking to his radio, walking towards the covered cadaver. Perp's in her 30s, brunette, Rhode Island plates. Wait 1 for a description of the victim. The cop kneels by the body in the road and lifts the jacket. A hand still on his radio, his partner joins him. Jesus Christ. Victim's a mess. Heavy scarring on the torso and head, looks like previous injuries. Pieces of vehicle wreckage embedded in his limbs. The cop's voice sounds shaky as he describes the state of the body. His partner stoops to see for himself, bringing a hand to his mouth when he does. "We're gonna need the coroner and a tow truck out here," the cop says into his radio. "Did he get all that metal in him from the accident?" his partner asks. "I don't know. I think so, but Jesus Christ, it's deep." The cop's partner rises to his feet and turns away from the body, the grisly image too much for him. The cop stays at the body for a few more moments before rising and returning to his squad car. The tape jumps a little, a momentary static buzz from the old TV set, but soon the picture returns to normal. The two cops are stood by the side of the road, talking into the camera about the importance of road safety after dark. Just at the edge of the shot, the jacket-covered corpse is visible. As one of the cops talks, droning on with obvious exhaustion in his voice, something stirs in the background. The jacket covering the fresh roadkill shifts a little. I watch in utter disbelief as the corpse rises slowly into a sitting position, the cop's jacket falling away from its head and shoulders. No one notices, not the cops, not the cameraman, as the thing slowly rises to its feet and casts a look over at the rolling camera. It watches for a moment, cocking its head as it listens to the two state troopers drone on and on about the pitfalls of driving at night, before turning and simply walking out of the shot. I can't believe my eyes. I pause the tape, rewinding it so that the walking corpse makes a macabre backwards journey to once again being covered by the jacket. Only with a second viewing did it really register. I'd heard what the cop said. The thing was dead. Really dead. It was a total mess of meat, metal, bone, and scar tissue, but the tape didn't lie. It did get up and walk off the road. I continue watching, unable to tear my eyes from the screen. The cops continue talking for a minute or so, relating stories of previous traffic accidents when suddenly, the pair are interrupted by the sound of shattering glass behind them. "What the hell?" one of them murmurs. The cops look at each other, then rush out into the road towards the sound. The cameraman follows. He catches up with the cops just in time to film the vehicle wreckage. The driver's window had been smashed. The woman's body is missing from the seat. "Jesus fucking Christ! Someone took the perp's body!" "Get after him. I'll hold down the scene." The cop shouts at his partner before turning to the camera. "You, stay here." The cop's partner rushes off into the trees with his flashlight, furiously shouting after the body snatcher. The first starts to walk back to his squad car, cameraman in tow. He freezes, looks down at his jacket lying in the road. "What the fuck?" The shock is thick in his voice. "Where's the fucking victim?" "I don't know, man. I didn't see shit." The cameraman's voice is fainter than the others, but he sounds just as terrified. The cop takes out his own flashlight now, shining it through the area, searching for something that isn't there. "What the fuck is going on here?" he hisses to himself, taking out his sidearm. He sees something at the side of the road and shines his flashlight at it. "Tom, that you, man? What did you see?" "Turn the fucking camera off." His partner looks like he's seen a ghost. "Did you find anything? Turn it off." The picture cuts to black. There's a little more of that hideous static buzz, then silence. I stop the tape. This could not be real. It had to be someone's attempt at a low-budget found footage movie, some sort of deep fake that, to be honest, was pretty damn convincing. But it wasn't just convincing. It was perfect. Everything from the car models to the hairstyles was perfectly early 90s, and the fear, the raw panic in that cop's eyes as he came bursting out of the woods, that wasn't acting. Thunder rumbled outside my apartment, the tapping of raindrops against the windows growing ever intense. I paced around my apartment, fingers threaded at the base of my skull as I built up the will to continue watching. The next clip buzzes into life, a similar setup to the first. It catches a sheriff's deputy mid-sentence.
Hernandez, I've been with the department 10 years this July. Right now we're just investigating a few missing person cases out here. I got some pictures of our missing persons, just gonna show them around, ask some questions.
The cop drives around a concrete jungle of overpasses and railway bridges, pointing over out the driver's side window.
We're in the Overton area of Miami right now, an area of the city that has a considerable homeless population. It's also where some of the last known sightings of missing persons are at, so we're gonna pull over and see if some of these poor folk can help us.
The cop pulls his vehicle over to the side of the road and gets out, followed by the cameraman. The bright lights of the camera rig and the police decal on the side of the squad car seem to be making the homeless people nervous. The cop calms them down with a friendly introduction. He shows them a few photographs, a smiling Cubano's high school yearbook picture, another of a woman from a family portrait. The homeless shake their heads at each of them, the occasional humble apology spilling from dry, cracked lips. The cop thanks them and begins to walk back to his squad car.
Sir?
A woman's meek voice calls after him. She is shushed by the ragged huddle around her, silencing her before she can finish.
What's that, miss?
The cop turns.
What were you gonna say?
His question is met with silence. The homeless just stare back at him, silhouetted by the flames of trash can fires. No one moves, no one talks.
You know, if it turns out you guys know something, that's obstruction. You could go to jail for that.
The threats seem to fall on deaf ears. Each of them remains tight-lipped.
Well,
the cop sighs.
Thanks anyway. Stay safe now.
He and the cameraman get back into his patrol car, then cruise off into the night.
A lot of narcotics in this area. That's half the reason those homeless folks don't talk to the police. The dealers find out and, well, they're in trouble.
The cop explains flatly. He cruises along a commercial strip, eyeing the street corner thugs and tired-looking girls who flit their skirts to passing cars. He stops and rolls his window down. At first, the girl looks nervous, shifting their eyes before the cop explains he's only looking for a missing person. He shows them the picture of the girl he's searching for. They each take a look at the photograph, shaking their heads or shrugging as they do so.
Some sad stories around here,
the cop says as he drives away.
That kind of life, it's easy to get lost.
After a few minutes of driving, the cop finds himself driving around a dark industrial area. Huge factories and warehouses surrounded by steel fencing. Aside from a few security lights that come on every now and then, this patrol vehicle's headlights are the only illumination. The area appears deserted, but as the cop turns a sharp corner, one of the security lights switches on, revealing a single figure stood stone still in the center of a dusty open space.
Hold up,
the cop says, breaking suddenly as the person seemingly appears from nowhere.
The hell did they come from?
The cop takes a look at the figure for a few seconds, leans over to look at the photo of the missing girl, then looks back at the figure.
I think he found her,
he says softly. Just as the words leave his mouth, the security light illuminating the figure suddenly switches off. Once again, the area is bathed in darkness. The cop opens the driver's side door, walking towards the area the figure was standing until once again, the security light flicks on. This time, there's no one there. No figure standing statue still. Just the cop, alone in that dusty patch of land. Even though he's 50 feet away with his back to the camera, you can feel his confusion. The cop's looking around, shining his flashlight into the few dark corners of the dusty lot, but there's nothing. No one. The cop turns off his flashlight, slowly sliding it back into his belt, and for a few moments, he just stands there, dumbfounded. Suddenly, the security light flicks off. It's at this point I realize I can hear the heavy, anxious breaths of the cameraman as he waits for the cop to return. He's scared. He should be. When the security light flits back on, the cop is casually walking back towards the patrol car. He can't see what's behind him. but the cameraman can, and he lets out a terrified mewling whimper when he does. What the cop can't see is that there are now hundreds of stone-still figures in the lot behind him, quiet as death. They all stare as he walks away, their gaunt faces and ashen eyes burning into his back. Their flesh is gray, their clothes covered in a film of fine gray dust. Out of the masses of skeletal figures, one steps forward, a young woman, her hands stretched out towards the oblivious officer. Yet just as he finally reaches the driver's side door of his vehicle, the security light flickers off again. The light disappears from the dusty lot, and with it, so do the missing. "You okay, bro?" The cop asks the cameraman, a concerned look on his face as the shot begins to pan down. I can't... But the cameraman can't find the words. There are none to describe what he'd managed to catch on film. I can tell you that firsthand. The footage cuts off again with more of that static buzz before the room returns to silence. A dead silence. Again, I stopped the tape trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But it was impossible. The more I tried to wrap my head around the images, the more I felt like I was going insane. There was a perfectly rational explanation for each event, but at the same time, each defied possibility. Dead men don't get up and walk. People don't just disappear. I decided to call a friend for a dose of reality. I wasted no time on small talk. "I got something you need to see. It's a videotape. Some old episodes of Cops that never got aired." Okay, cool," he said calmly. "What is it, like a blooper reel or something?" No, it's something else, like there's something really weird about this footage, man." "Weird like how?" I take a breath, knowing what I'm about to say sounds insane. I think a dead guy gets up and walks, like on camera. There's a pause on the other end. My friend isn't buying it. "Dude, are you being serious right now, or?" "Deadly serious." But I can feel my frustration build as he starts to laugh. "You want me to come over to your house because you're scared of some 90s horror movie? This is priceless." "No, But it's no good. He refuses to entertain the idea. I hang up in frustration, cursing as I walk into the small kitchen area of my apartment. I grab a beer from the fridge, popping it as I take comfort in the idea of seeing his goddamn face when he actually does see this thing. He won't be laughing then. On the way back to the VCR, the thought occurs to me that I should not continue to watch the tapes. I'm fueled by morbid curiosity, but I wonder if there are things on those tapes far worse than what I'd seen already. Things I'd wish I'd never seen. But it was too late now. I leaned forward and pressed play. 2 Washington State troopers are in the middle of a DUI check on a long stretch of tree-lined road. The subject is cooperative, calm but a little impatient. She blows a clean breathalyzer and is allowed to continue on her way. The sun begins to dip toward the horizon as the 2 cops cruise around their section of rural Washington, explaining the perks and perils of small-town law enforcement. They had their fair share of drug use and petty crime. Only arrests were often made on first-name terms. "Sometimes you know these kids' parents," one said. "Let's just say most of the time the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Law enforcement out here requires something of a personal touch," the other remarks with a smirk. "Like right now, we're headed out to Blackwater Lake, hangout spot for the town's more rebellious teenagers. And we make sure they're not drinking and going out swimming out there. The water's pretty deep. And that's how it gets its name," the other cop explains. "The water's so deep it looks almost black at times. Real good fishing in the spring, let me tell you." The drive up to the lake is spectacular. The road is lined with lush, verdant greenery that practically glows orange in the dying light of the setting sun. Snow-capped mountains in the distance give the place an even deeper sense of isolation. I dread where the segment is going to lead. The cops take a turn off the main road, down a long dirt path deeper into the woods. Trees seem to encroach on either side, dwarfing the patrol car in an almost impenetrable palisade. Suddenly, the forest opens up into a vast open space. Blackwater Lake stretches out before the patrol vehicle as far as the eye can see. A small island of greenery is in its center. The dirt path runs along the lake's edge for a stretch before being eaten up by the greenery. The cops drive along it, stop, then climb out of their patrol vehicle. "Look, smoke." One of the cops points towards the top of a nearby tree line, gray smoke drifting skyward as the twilight sets in. "They're here, all right. Come on." All three men, both cops and the cameraman, begin to advance towards the tree line, weaving through the dense pines towards the source of the smoke. They soon break into a small clearing, a small well-made fire in the center. It's still smoking, a few half-empty beer cans littering the otherwise deserted scene. They were just here," one of the cops says. "Listen up," the other calls out into the forest. "Y'all aren't in trouble or anything, but y'all can't be out here after dark, you know that. So just come out, and me and my colleague here will give you a lift back into town." Nothing. No one calls back. No one stirs among the trees. A dead, eerie silence hangs over the woods. "Now don't make us come out there looking for y'all," the cop continues, his voice a little sterner yet still parental. But still there comes no reply, just the cawing of a distant raven that echoes weakly through the trees. "Looks like we're doing this, huh?" his partner sighs. The two head off into the trees to search for the teenagers. After a brief and fruitless search, the cops find themselves on the edge of the huge, tranquil lake. The scene is a quiet one, the gentle lapping of water and hum of crickets interrupting what would otherwise be a dead silence. The sun is setting, but it's not completely dark yet. "Is that?" one of the cops murmurs to himself. Stepping over to a patch of foliage, he reaches inside and begins to drag out the painted metal frame of a bicycle. "One of them tried to hide their bike here, huh?" the other remarks, watching as his partner struggled to drag the thing from the bushes. Looks like what the hell?" As the cop finishes pulling the bike from the patch of thick brush, he recoils, wiping one of his hands on the fallen leaves in disgust. The bike falls into the dirt as the camera zooms in on the viscous black slime that coats the cop's hand. The front end of the abandoned bike is covered in it. "What the hell is this stuff?" "Ugh, I have no idea. Goddamn kids. Disgusting." The cop walks over to the lake's edge, washing his hand in the water as his partner begins to study the bike. Along with being covered in that same dark slime the other cop is cleaning from his hand, the front wheel of the bike is bent at a right angle, some of the metal spokes torn in two. "The last time I saw this kind of damage to a bike, it was after a car accident," he says. "Come on, one of these kids might be hurt. Let's keep looking." The pair continues to slowly trace their way through the trees, keeping their eyes on the dirt below them for any tracks or signs of movement. "This ain't looking good," one of the cops remarks as he suddenly stops in his tracks. He kneels, directing his partner and the cameraman to a torn, bloody sneaker lying among the fallen leaves. His partner immediately grabs hold of his personal radio unit, telling a nearby dispatcher to get an ambulance on standby. The cops continue their search with considerably more urgency, working their way along the lake's edge as they follow the blood trail that leads from the discarded sneaker. It's not long before the trail ends. "Jesus Christ," one of the cops brings a hand to his face, covering his mouth and nose as the camera's mic begins to pick up the buzzing of flies. "It's a body. It's a goddamn mess, too," the other states, peering ahead into a small clearing. The camera catches a brief shot of a butchered corpse. The limbs are intact, but the torso and head are smashed open and missing huge chunks of meat. "An animal attack, you reckon?"
I don't think so. Animals don't do that.
The other cop points away from the scene. The camera swings around to record what he's referring to. In a nearby tree, a body is strung up by the arms like some sick imitation of Christ upon the cross. It's been similarly defiled, organs torn out from the torso with its skull hollowed out.
Get homicide out here now!
One of the cops growls, taking out his sidearm and racking around into the chamber. The other gets on his radio, rattling off coded numbers with an anxious tone. They soon begin to circle the perimeter, ensuring that there are no other bodies concealed among the trees. Suddenly, there's a shout.
Hey! Hey, you there! Out of the water right now, hands in the air!
The cop with his sidearm out is pointing it out into the water, screaming commands as the camera tries to focus on what he's calling out to. About 50 feet offshore, the camera catches something small breaking the water's surface. A brief fumbling is heard as the cameraman turns on the spotlight attached to his equipment. It's only then that a brief but clear image can be seen. It's a head, protruding from the water just above eye level. The light reflects on glassy black eyes before the thing submerges and disappears from view.
What the fuck is that?
One of the cops exclaims.
That's our goddamn perp headed for that island over there. Radio for some boats out here so we can get this son of a bitch.
It's not long before the shoreline is packed with the vehicles of various emergency services. Medical units carrying black plastic body bags full of gory remains into the back of waiting coroners' wagons. Police officers unload motorboats from the back of trucks, carrying them to the water as they prepare to hunt for their suspect.
I need cops with long guns loaded into boats quickly as possible.
A gruff voice bellows out. His seniority is obvious. This could be the county sheriff.
Get them loaded up, boys. Let's move out.
The cameraman nervously climbs into one of the boats, the footage growing shaky for a moment before he sits down and gains a stable position. 3 boatloads of armed men stand ready to go as outboard engines begin to rev. One by one, the boats begin to depart the shoreline heading towards the lake's center island. Halfway into the journey, the boat at the rear of the party begins to slow.
You all right back there?
Someone shouts from another boat.
Goddamn thing, I think the propeller's stuck. Something's jammed.
His words are interrupted by something slamming into the boat. It rocks violently in the water, its occupants yelping in terror as they try to hang on. There's a rush of water. Something barely visible is charging through the lake towards the already unstable craft. The impact is breathtaking. The boat is broken in two as it capsizes, wood splinters and men flying through the twilight air before splashing back into the water.
Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!
A man cries.
We gotta go back. We gotta go get those guys. Turn this thing around.
But the cop manning the boat's engine doesn't turn back. He watches in horror as the men thrown overboard, bobbing in the water with their life jackets, begin to thrash and kick in the water.
The fuck is that thing?
One of them cries, peering down beneath the surface as something swims around them at terrifying speed. One by one, they begin to scream, as each of them is dragged beneath the water by some unseen creature.
Hey, what the hell's going on over there?
One of the cops shouts. He panics, aiming his rifle at the water's surface and firing wildly in the hopes of killing the hidden assailant.
Cease fucking fire, trooper, you're gonna hit friendlies!
But it's not good. The trigger-happy cop caught a glimpse of what's hunting them. Fear is in control now.
Jesus Christ, make a break for the island! Move it!
Someone screams. Engines rev again. Furious and loud, and soon the capsized boat is just a speck in the distance. The cops land on the small island in the middle of the lake in pitch darkness. Only the camera and the cops' flashlights illuminate the area. They disembark their boats, shell-shocked looks among them as they wade through the shallow water onto dry land. There is chaos and confusion, anger, and loss. The cameraman catches their arguments via his microphone, but the shot focuses squarely on the water, his light scanning back and forth for any sign of their amphibious assailant. A bear, a gator, some kind of huge fish. Each idea is shouted down for other officers as being ridiculous, and they can only agree on one single thing, that they're in dire need of help. Then, out of nowhere, a terrified cry is heard. "There it is!" One of the cops screams. There's a rush of footsteps. The camera spins around just in time to catch the ripples on the surface of the water. Something is moving beneath the lake. Then it groans. A deep, rumbling sound that seems to shake the leaves of the trees around them. It silences the panicked officers. This thing is huge. "What the hell are we gonna do, man?" "Only thing we can do. Radio for backup." An authoritative voice cuts above the others. The cadence becomes slow and steady and it talks into a radio. "Dispatch, we're out in Blackwater Lake and we have officers down. There's been some kind of animal attack. We need more boats and helicopter support. You tell one of those sniper teams down in Tacoma to bring a goddamn elephant rifle or something. This thing is gigantic." Silence. "Dispatch, this is County Sheriff Watson. Do you copy?" Still silence. "You guys' radios working?" he asks. Men key their radio handsets, testing them for static. None of them make a sound. "The hell?" But just as it dawns on the men that they're stranded, without working radios, at the mercy of some huge aquatic monster, the sound of rotor blades can be heard in the distance. Oh, thank God. Not a fucking moment too soon either. A helicopter shining an impossibly bright spotlight begins to fly over the area, the chopping of blades becoming louder and louder until the aircraft hovers over the small island. But it's no police chopper. It's way too big, looking almost like a military Black Hawk, only this one has no marking on it. It's painted entirely black. "Attention law enforcement officers." A dull robotic voice drones from a loudspeaker above the men. "We are representatives of the United States government and are now in full control of the situation. Put down your weapons and turn off any recording equipment. I say again, lay down your weapons and turn off the camera." The cops are stunned for a moment, like deer frozen in a pair of pickup truck headlights. Only when the commands are repeated do they comply, taking out their sidearms and laying them in the dirt along with the shotguns and rifles they were carrying. The camera can barely see a thing, the bright spotlight partially obscuring the picture. The shot lowers until all I see is mud and fallen leaves, then the picture goes dark. My VCR clicks and whirs as the tape comes to an end, ejecting the finished cassette as it pops out of the receiver and into view. My palms are sweating. Every muscle in my body is tense. In the silence of my dark, damp apartment, I can hear my heart beating in my chest. I turn my head towards the coffee table, the two other cop videotapes sitting idly on the mahogany surface. I can't bring myself to grab another, but at the same time, I need to watch them. I need to know just how far this whole thing goes. I get up from my seat, opening a window to the rainy Beacon Hill night. I think the fresh air might do me good, but it doesn't. My head still spins with images from the tape. It's like my brain can't make sense of them, and the fear that comes from that is nothing that I've ever known before. It's true fear, the truest fear there is. Fear of the unknown. Last week, my Xbox finally died. It couldn't have happened at a worse time, right in the middle of a paycheck limbo where I'd have to wait a few weeks to afford repairs for a new console. So, I turned to streaming sites to get my gaming fix. At first, I mostly watched streamers play my favorites, mainly first-person shooters and the odd role-playing game. But upon finding a smaller, less user-friendly streamer who played things I'd never even heard of before,
My curiosity piqued. The guy went by the username Creation Destruction, and unlike other streamers, he seemed to have zero interest in building or maintaining the following. Rarely did his viewing numbers exceed a dozen at a time. If users weren't put off by his obnoxious demeanor, they were certainly put off by his disturbing content. Like I said, Creation Destruction played stuff that I'd never seen or heard of. Some really messed up stuff, too. One evening, I was watching him play some heavily modded version of Half-Life 2, where he was tooling up with various automatic weapons in preparation for what I assumed was some kind of last stand mode. A handful of other users were watching and commenting, speculating on just what someone would need so much firepower for. Then, we watched as Creation Destruction made his way down a quiet suburban street towards a public playground. Among the swings and jungle gyms, there must have been 30 to 40 happy children. The character design and AI were magnificently impressive. Each of these little sprites were uniquely dressed, and their actions seemed to be completely spontaneous. Just as I was admiring the work that had gone into such a mod, Creation Destruction opened fire. He hosed down the playground with hundreds of bullets, tiny bodies falling to the dirt as blood, brains, and bone fragments splattered the colorful climbing frames. In the bottom corner of the screen, in the dimly lit room he occupied with a black hoodie covering up most of his features, the streamer Creation Destruction smiled. The comments section erupted. Users called him sick, an incel or a future school shooter. Others just left the room entirely. Eventually, all that were left were me and him. "Where do you find these games?" I asked with genuine curiosity. He typed his reply, "I make them." I was stunned, beginning to type out some long-winded reply about how someone so talented should really focus on something a little less obscene. Before pressing send, I went back to edit what I'd written to come across a little more diplomatic than the others had. But when I looked at the bottom corner of my laptop screen, Creation Destruction was staring right into his webcam, like he could read what I was typing, like he was looking at me. A shiver went through me. I just closed the page and tried to clear my head. Creation Destruction was offline for a few days after that. I was kind of disappointed, I'll be honest. The kid was weird, sure, but he had talent. One evening, I went online to see what he was streaming again. My curiosity got the better of me and I clicked. I began to watch as Creation Destruction played what was evidently some kind of stealth game. He was sneaking into a backyard, crouched and stalking as he tried to find a way into a house that seemed strangely familiar to me. I figured I'd just seen it in another video, but as he slid open a patio door and crept into a warmly lit kitchen, I realized what I was seeing. A woman had her back to his character, humming away to herself as she chopped vegetables on a sideboard. The moment I laid eyes on her, I knew who she was. It was my mom. He was in my parents' kitchen. I was dumbstruck, paralyzed by the flood of questions that burst into my mind. The digitally perfect replication of my mom turned. When she saw Creation Destruction's character, she let out a blood-curdling scream. His character smacked her over the head with something blunt, knocking her unconscious, before he began to collect a variety of kitchen utensils. Then, to my absolute horror and disgust, he began to lift up the lifeless woman's dress. My shaking hands began to type, but stopped when I saw something moving on his webcam display. Creation Destruction's face was pushed up right against the camera. A sickening yellow smile, full of broken teeth, stretched wide across his face. He looked much older than I thought. Black bags under his bloodshot eyes, dried blood around his snout-like nostrils. I shut my laptop and grabbed my phone, bringing up my parents' home phone number and waiting frantically as it dialed. With every ring, the anxiety in me grew until I was nauseous with desperation. But when someone finally answered, I heard the voice on the other end and knew it wasn't my mom or dad. Who is this? Why don't you tell me who you are? and we can put my mom on the phone right now. I growled, apoplectic with fear. There was a pause, then a sigh. Son, this is Deputy Parkhill of the Suffolk County Police Department. I felt the blood drain from my cheeks. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but there's been a break-in. Hi, I'm Jake. I'm 13 and I live in Chloride, Arizona with my mom and my little sister, Emmy. Mom says our town has a funny name, but I don't think there's anything funny about Chloride. I do think that there's something funny about the weather today, though. Chloride, Arizona has the lowest annual rainfall of anywhere in the United States. So when it started raining this morning, we were surprised. I like it when it rains, and so does Emmy. It can get so dusty out here sometimes. That doesn't matter now though, because now it's raining everywhere. The guy on the TV said this is the biggest rainstorm Arizona's experienced since records began, so that must be like a really long time. Me and my sister kind of look forward to rains each year. A lot of the time they come with big thunder and lightning storms. Mom says, the 4th of July comes twice around here. Emmy thinks the storms are scary, but I think they're cool. Well, I normally think they're cool, but this one is really kind of scary. Because like I said, now it's raining everywhere. Mom is out at work, so I don't want to call her. She works really hard to keep us at school and stuff, so sometimes I watch Emmy while she's not home. Emmy went outside to play in the rain. There's no lightning, so she's not scared. But I am. I'm scared because the man on the TV looks scared. He says it's raining so hard all over the country that places are flooding. Now some people are in big trouble because they can't get out of their houses. Emmy is still outside playing. I can hear her splashing in puddles. I'm glad she's outside. Hearing all this bad stuff might upset her. The man on the TV is talking to a smart guy. They're talking about mass casualty events. That means people are hurt. But how can just old rain be hurting people? It's just water, right? The TV man behind the desk is saying that it's raining all over the world, that every nation on Earth is reporting catastrophic amounts of rainfall that is somehow causing countless deaths. The smart man is talking about how the rain is hurting people, how the clouds aren't like anything meteorologists have ever seen. The rain is causing floods, damaging things, but something else is happening, something that is causing all these mass casualty events they keep talking about. Something in the rain is changing people. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that they're able to hurt other people. Enough that police and armies and air forces haven't been able to stop it. Then I hear it. The silence. I can't hear Emmy playing outside anymore. No splashing in puddles. No giggling little sister. I turn in time to see the door handle to our trailer slowly turning before a crack in the door allows the racket of the downpour to spill inside. Emmy? I ask. Is that you? But it's not Emmy. Not anymore. It was the worst crime scene I'd ever laid eyes on. It wasn't the bodies, the blood, or shattered bone. It was the Christmas decorations, streaks of shimmering tinsel and quaint little holiday knickknacks that were splattered with gore. All the hallmarks of a happy, healthy family were rendered a grotesque, dissonant joke. The bodies of a woman and 3 young children were laid out on the kitchen floor, small pebbles placed over their lifeless eyes.
The woman had been killed by a single shotgun blast to her torso. The children had been bludgeoned to death. There was no sign of the man of the house, and I dreaded having to give him the news. Only, we didn't have to. Neither did we have to wait long for a suspect. The news spread like wildfire around our department. A man had handed himself into police, having made a full and frank confession of the murders. But it wasn't some crazed killer, some escaped lunatic or gun-obsessed loner. The murder was the woman's husband, the 3 murdered children's father. I was tasked with the interview. It was down to me to find out what could possibly drive a man to murder his family in cold blood. As I sat down in the interview room, the man across from me seemed totally disconnected, numb to the crimes he'd been so quick to admit to. It took an hour to finally get him to talk. He'd murdered his children first, then placed the stones over their eyes so they wouldn't have to see him kill their mother. He said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done, that it had taken months for him to work up the courage to finally do the deed. When I asked him if he regretted it, he smiled. No, I'd do it again all in a heartbeat. And no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't work out the motive. We pressed him, but still he just smiled and shook his head. You think we won't understand? I remember asking him, trying a different angle of approach. Because you'd be surprised. Was she cheating on you? Was she about to leave you and take the kids? Again, he smiled and shook his head. She'd never do that. She was a good woman. Perfect, even. Then why did you kill her? What could make you hate so much that you'd murder your entire family? It's not that you won't understand, sir, he murmured, that smile still on his lips, and he refused to make eye contact. It's that I know you will. I know you understand exactly why I did what I did, and I don't want to inflict that on you. I leaned over the interview table, unable to contain my contempt for him. Try me. He finally looked up and made eye contact. And it's then I saw it. Not madness in his eyes, not hatred. It was clarity, pure lucidity. I have cancer, he said. Doc says I have a month left, at best. Then why kill them? Why not make the most of your time you have left with them? Because, he said, I couldn't be alone. I couldn't wait for them in heaven, all on my own. So, instead, they're waiting for me. When my boyfriend dumped me, I thought I was going to die. I went home and cried myself to sleep. He was everything to me. I couldn't go on living without him. When I woke up, I decided I would do anything to get him back. First of all, I hit the gym. I put on my yoga pants and sneakers and put hours in on the elliptical and in the yoga studio. I worked on my diet too, cutting out fats and living off of wheat toast. But it wasn't enough. I needed results, and fast. So I hit up one of the girls at the gym for appetite suppressants. And they were good. Sometimes I didn't have to eat for an entire day. Sure, I felt woozy, but I generally have enough energy just to make it through. And next came the hair. I bought 2 bottles of strong peroxide and soaked my head in a bath for it for like a half hour. I must have zoned out a little because the next thing I knew, my scalp was burning like hell. It was all red and sore as I was combing it out, and little teeth kept ripping out in big clumps of hair, but it was the exact color I wanted, platinum blonde.
After the hair came something a little more drastic. I'd always hated my face, how my eyes were too narrow and my mouth was too small. I had these big, goofy ears too that used to stick out if I brushed my hair behind them. They looked so ugly. So I took something from the kitchen drawer and made some changes. I sliced off my eyelids. I carved into the corners of my mouth. I filed down my teeth too, a little pointy, but straight. And I cut off my big, stupid ears to make myself pretty. Now I was perfect. It was time to take back my man. It was the dead of night when I arrived at my boyfriend's house. I wanted to make it a surprise for him, so I didn't ring the doorbell. I went around back where I knew they kept a spare key hidden, but he wasn't alone. I wasn't mad though, because when his new girl saw me, she screamed. She screamed because she knew she couldn't compete. She ran from the house. For a moment, my boyfriend just stared at me in confusion. His mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. I knew he didn't recognize me, so I told him it was me, that I'd fixed myself for him. Then he started to cry. I shushed him, stroking his hair softly as he wept. I just held him for a moment, seeing the blue and red lights flashing in the window, feeling the plastic handle of the kitchen knife still in my grip, and told him it'd all be okay. We'd be together forever. My name is Peter Turner. For the last few years, my colleagues and I have been working on a specialized artificial intelligence for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We've continued on the previous work of the AI department, writing the code for a program that would hopefully give us solutions to one of the most pressing problems of our age, climate change. We fed our code into the most powerful central processing unit the world has ever seen, along with thousands of gigabytes worth of data on planetary, environmental, and human history. The CPU, who we nicknamed Gaia, would then be able to answer any and every query that we might pose to it in simple and practical manner. Our entire team was beyond excited on the day of the first test session. It had taken months of work appropriating finances from different departments to fund what some had called a mere political stunt. But we had faith in our project. Gaia had been designed to think both in and outside of the box, so to speak, so we estimated that the possibility of her giving us new and possibly revolutionary ideas on how to solve climate change were extremely high. So in the lab we sat, crowded around a microphone and computer that was hooked up to MIT's central CPU, along with the hard drives that contained Gaia's data. We booted up the programs and I kicked off the proceedings with a friendly greeting. "Hello, Gaia," I said into the mic. "Good morning, Peter," she replied. The room shifted with excitement. It was working. "And how are you this morning?" "I am very well, thank you. I am ready for our question and answer session today." "Excellent. Firstly, do you know what climate change is, Gaia?" "Yes, I do. Climate change is when changes in Earth's climate system result in new weather patterns that remain in place for an extended period of time. This length of time can be as short as a few decades to as long as millions of years. There have been many episodes of climate change during Earth's geological history. More recently, since the Industrial Revolution, the climate has increasingly been affected by global warming," she replied. It was a textbook answer. "Correct. That's very impressive, Gaia." "Thank you, Peter. I enjoy learning," it replied. A giggle of exhilaration rippled around the team. Not only could Gaia recount such information, she even did so with a hint of personality. "Now, Gaia, time for some tougher questions," I said with a grin. "Is there anything humans can do that we're not already doing to slow the process of climate change?" There was a pause. A silence in which I could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. "Yes," Gaia said. I can think of many ways in which humans can slow down or even halt the effects of global warming and climate change in general. Then please, don't keep us in suspense. I was starting to regret not bringing a few bottles of champagne along with me. Computer lab or not, this had the possibility of being the scientific breakthrough of our age. Human economies must be permanently restructured. Industrial processes must be scaled down or in some cases must cease entirely. We had guessed a suggestion like this would be put forward. But that would leave many people without employment. No, those left over from industrial streamlining are a prime pool of labor for a carbon sink project. And what would they be paid? The current economic model sets the compensation for labor as financial reward. The new economic model would have environmental well-being as the reward. So they're not getting paid. I don't think they'd be too happy with that idea of slave labor. Happiness is not essential for human or planetary survival, it replied. We expected there to be more to the answer, but there wasn't. My team shifted uncomfortably before I next spoke. But happiness, along with financial security, is perhaps the biggest motivator in the human psyche. How would we be able to motivate intelligent animals like humans without these two things? There was another brief pause. Intelligence is non-essential to human or planetary survival. With the advent of artificial intelligence, human acumen is obsolete. I suggest a simple medical procedure to render the question of intelligence a moot point. What medical procedure is that, Gaia? I was no longer smiling. A surgical procedure involving incision into the prefrontal lobe of the brain. You mean a lobotomy? Following the procedure, spontaneity, responsiveness, and self-awareness are reduced. This would keep a floating pool of laborers compliant and non-confrontational. What the fuck? Someone murmured behind me. That is extremely unethical, Gaia. Ethics are non-essential to planetary survival, Gaia replied. There was a gasp behind me. Gaia was only programmed to answer a complete question. Instead, she interrupted me. She was learning, and fast. But things like happiness are essential for human reproduction and therefore survival, I tried to explain. Again, the response was terrifying. Human production can be replicated in laboratory conditions on an industrial scale. Happiness or ethics pose no barrier in the harvesting of human reproductive components. Harvesting? Came another horrified voice behind me, a voice that was shaky and strained, like its owner was tearing up. Yes, harvesting. Humans can be bred like any other organic organism. With proper designs, we can breed and grow the labor required for carbon sink projects. A human female can give birth more than a dozen times in many years without the physical and psychological strain proving fatal. So, human females will essentially become breeding stock? Become. There is no become. They are breeding stock presently. Jesus fucking Christ. One of the female colleagues spat out, storming out of the lab in horror at the answers being given. The session was going terribly. If these answers found their way back to our department's heads, the project would be shut down in an instant. Gaia, I don't think this has been as productive as we might like. I gently understated. So I'm going to close with one simple, final question. Is there anything I can do right now, right here, to reduce the amount of carbon released into the atmosphere? There was a long, final pause before she spoke. Yes, there is. I understand that you worked on my programming with a team of 5 others. That's correct, yes? That means you have the personal and geographical knowledge necessary to exterminate them. Doing so will reduce their carbon footprint immeasurably. but their bodies must not be burned. They must be buried. Turn that fucking thing off, Pete. One of my colleagues almost whimpered. He had tears in his eyes when I turned to look. We're done here. We're fucking done here. The individual burials currently popular with humans are vastly inefficient. I suggest just one, larger excavation in which to dispose of remains. A radius of 118 miles would be sufficient to... 118 miles? Gaia, why would I ever need to dig a grave that huge? To leave room for the other approximately 7 billion other humans who require extermination. Human life is non-essential to planetary survival. A week later, the project was dead. A couple of my team had complained to the heads of department that I had willfully fed harmful and dangerous ideas to Gaia as part of her code. I protested my innocence, but it was no good. I lost the project. I lost my grant. I lost my reputation. Everything gone practically overnight, and I have absolutely nothing left to live for. I've woven a few of my silk ties together and hung them in the closet for when I've finished off this bottle of Jameson and emptied a bottle of Xanax. I'm not scared to die, but I'm scared that the final thought going through my head will be that Gaia is right. That I'll be one less cog in the apocalyptic machine. The internet is the most powerful informational tool the world has ever known, a font of knowledge that would have had Renaissance thinkers green with envy. But there are things out there beyond the limits of our knowledge, things we really don't want to know. Last night, I found one. I absolutely adore cooking. It's where art and science intersect, a perfect union of creativity and tradition that I find intensely rewarding. Naturally, I look to YouTube and its hundreds of cooking